Testing, testing, that coming through all right? Can you hear it on your headset? Back in the audience. Yep, we're good. Test, test. Hear me upstairs. Good to go.
What is supposed to look even?
Does it fit to look even?
Yeah?
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that all right? Is it good? All right. Come on then.
Mum, who is this reserve
Yep,
soundy up
there's a
there.
soundy
We'll see
guy.
if he-
There we go. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Oh, cool.
Awesome.
So when you're at the lectern. got all on about.
Right, yep.
Really one of the things I really even if we've got to walk around
Yep.
and say, see this here,
Yep.
this is how it's connected, so
Yep.
we can actually, tino mori au te Kōrero. Tino whanaunga tāua. Ka taonga au ka hoki mai i Ratahana, i tēnei asa nei. I tū tētahi karaki Awhanaunga Matariki te ata nei. I Tarapauma. Tēnei. Mutu ana taku karaki o mātu au taraka. A tarawa ki te toru tarere mai ki tēnei. Tai mai ki tēnei kau. Ako ake nei taku nei mōrio. Tēnei ata. E hoki atu au ki reira i ngā nahi. Ki reira mōrio. Pai tari tai mai ki te kaupapa hei te. Ko kau mātua rawa. Wea no i reira tahu.
There'll be a cameraman here, so just don't be aware this way. Yeah. And whatever he's moving on, it'll come up and yeah. Maybe get like. Kia ora. Ka pai. Matariki te tipua, matariki te tawhito, matariki te kāhui whetū, matariki hunganui, matariki ahunganui, matariki manako nui. E ara matariki ki runga, whano whano, haramai te toki, haumi e, hui e, tā iki e. Nei rā te mihi kia koutou katoa, kua huihui mai i tēnei ahiahi, mai a mātou o te papa tongarewa. Koutou kua tai ātinana mai, koutou hoki kua tai ki runga i te rorohiko, i te ipurangi rānei, anō nei te mihi. Ai, hara mai koutou. Ka pai. Kia ora, ko Sonia tōku ingoa. I'm the head of public programs at Te Papa, and my job is to do a bit of housekeeping before the real MC comes in. So if you need to go to the wharepaku, the toilets at any time during the kōrero, you go outside Soundings Theatre, turn to the left, there's a big whale's heart, and the wharepaku are just on the other side of the whale heart. So feel free to pop up, do your thing, and then come back anytime, all good. In an emergency, our lovely hosts, koutou, can you just wave, hosts? They become the bosses and we follow their instruction, and they'll make sure that we get to a place that is safe depending on what the situation is. Ka pai. Like I said before, this kaupapa is being live streamed, so ngā mihi nui to everyone that's online. Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of people who are watching from home around the motu, which is really awesome. And I think that's it from me. We've got an awesome lineup of kai kōrero today, but I'll let our MC speak a bit more about that. I feel like this fella doesn't really need an introduction. Hoi, nau mai, haere mai ki runga i te atamira, Dr. Rangi Mātāmua. Kia ora.
Kia ora tātou. I was about to say mōrena, but it's the afternoon sometime. Thank you for coming along today, and for all of you that have connected online. Mihi nui ki a koutou. I suppose I don't want to take up too much time because I really want to get into the kōrero that's about to follow. One of the amazing things about being around Te Papa and being at Te Papa is just being exposed to the incredible amount of resource that is here in terms of the wealth of specimens and taonga and that they've collected over many, many years. And that's added with the in-house expertise of the people that are in this place. And one of the things that we've been really keen on doing is taking some of the treasures, some of the natural treasures, some of the taonga and treasures that we have, cultural taonga, and putting them on display and talking about not just what they are, but actually talking about their application and how they were applied. And so we get a sense of not just that as an object on its own, but actually that object in the place of practice. And today we have 3 experts in their space, and they are going to talk to the work that they do. They're going to talk about mātauranga Māori, and they're going to talk about many of the objects that you can see on the table in front of you and how that they actually connect to practice. And we have many things, you probably can't see them, but we've got a wonderful cameraman here who, while people are talking, they're actually going to show you what some of these objects are. We have various insects, we have various plants, we have various fish species, we have birds, we have different taonga, and the people that are about to follow are going to talk about them and explain how they are used. I just want you to cast an eye quickly over all of the objects that you can see. Apart from the rat that's on the table, each and every one of these species corresponds to a star cluster, or a constellation in the sky. And it will be visible in the morning sky before the sun rises, informing you about when you should be interacting with that creature, with that insect, or with that particular taonga or implement and when it should be used. And so before we get into that in much more detail, I'm just going to introduce our first speaker. I want to introduce Francine Wineti, who is from Ngāti from Te Awa o Whanganui, Tū Wharetoa, and Ngāti Kahungunu ki te Wairoa. She is a senior executive and a leader, and she's very passionate about research. She's a scientist by background, and passionate about science and innovation. But her passions, her true passions are te moana, the ocean, and in particular her mara. And I've seen her garden, and it is absolutely incredible. She is currently pauarahi at Te Ratonga Tirorangi, the Met Service, in the executive leadership team. So please give me a big round of applause, please, for Francine.
Tēnā tātou. Tēnā tātou I runga I te karanga o tēnei rā I tui nei te tāngata. Mākua ki koia te kaupapa kua whakaritea hei hui ngā tāngata hei tui ngā kōrero. Ko ai au I tu nei he uri tēnei ngā wai rere mai te kā ui maunga ko te Wanganui. Kei kora te kōrero ko au te awa ko au. Ko Francine Wineti ahau. E kore au e ngaro, he kākanoa hau e rui a mai I rangiatia. My life, I will never be lost, for I am a seed which is grown, which is sown in the heavens of rangiatia. Now, my life has grown through the planting of seeds. As the seeds grow, I grow. So Rangi has asked me to join today's kōrero to share my story in relation to our kaupapa today, ngā whetū o te Taiao. He has also asked me to talk about my journey and Matariki, gardening, and also about time, and then putting what I know into practice. So my friends and family have always known to me to be a Taiao type person. My tupuna, my ancestors from Ruapehu down through the Wanganui River were market gardeners. I'm a descendant made up of genetic memory, intrinsic knowledge transmitted from generation to generation. My dad was a hunter-gatherer, whether on land or diving for kaimuana. He was brought up beside his marae, Wanganui River. And my mother, she was a Pākehā, and she had the same inclination with a deep knowledge of gardening, and her knowledge was to survive. My parents separated when I was still young, and my mother brought my sister and I up as a solo mum, and she was on the benefit, and we were living in a state-owned house in Tauranga Moana. So our house was the only house in our whole street of state-owned houses that was planted out in gardens. Big trees, vegetable gardens, flower beds everywhere. Every little bit of grass was converted to a garden. So she grew food because that's the majority of what we could afford and access. As a kid, I used to spend hours walking around the garden centres with her, dragged around to her friends' gardens, and she would identify all the plants to me. Camellias, hydrangeas, gardenia, ginkgo, witch hazel, chamomile, calendula, everything. And I wasn't paying attention until 30 years later. Subconsciously, I was paying attention. I carried that knowledge from my mum with me to where I am today as a mum and as a practitioner of gardening and a practitioner of helping people connect to place and environment. 30 years ago, gardening was different. We all composted. Composting was the norm. To this day, I don't think I've ever not had a compost bin, no matter how urban I lived. I'm quite judgy too. If I go to mates' houses looking around for the compost bucket, to put food scraps in. If I don't find one, I'll be asking, why don't you compost? I'll show you. It's simple. After I finished high school, I went to academic study and studied marine science. Worked up the ranks as scuba dive instructor, did some diving instructing in Vanuatu, and then when finishing marine science studies, I went to Australia and ended up studying aquaculture. Then I bounced onto the salmon farms in the South Island and worked as a fish house scientist. Academic studies was great, bit of science, then put into practice, then a bit more academia and science and put into practice. After I left the salmon farms, I went and I was awarded an international fisheries business scholarship to Japan through Te Ohu Kaimwana. Back then, that was called the Treaty of Waitangi Fisheries Commission, and worked at one of the largest international fishing companies in Japan. They have some pretty awesome scientific research studies centres there. But gradually, I was being severed from the environment, learning about it, but not really engaging with it. So after I returned from Japan, I was placed in Te Ohu Kaimwana, the Māori Fisheries Commission, to work on Māori fisheries and aquaculture policy. I had such an incredible spout of growth there, exposure to iwi leadership, policy, advocacy, treaty settlements and te ao Māori. But those times put me in an office for 9 years. I always did have a pining to return to my practice and physical connection to the moana. Fast forward, I'm utterly disconnected to place and environment, and I worked hard to get out of this. Today I live on the Kapiti coast on a little farmlet with my partner and 2 young kids. My aspiration has always been to live close to the coast and work on a wee plot of whenua where I can return to practicing again, focusing on my kids and collecting and planting seeds. Moving there physically has been fantastic, but it was the reconnection to my ancestral narratives and connecting to place and environment that allowed me to start to grow. So through the planting of seeds, I grow. Through the planting of seeds, we retain our connection to our place, we retain our connection to the environment. It was the story of Hine Pū Te Hue that planted the seed for my practice. Hine Pū Te Hue, she's the atua for hue. This is also known as gourds or calabashes. Here she is, and what she looks like after she has done her full cycle of growth. We remember Hine Pū Te Hue as the atua who calmed the rage between Tāwhiri Mātia, the god of winds, and Tūmataonga, atua of war. Tāwhiri Mātia threatened to tear the world apart when the separation of their parents, Ranginui and Papatuanuku, happened. Raging, Tāwhiri Mātia sent forth a huge storm intending to tear the world apart. It was Tūmataonga that fought the most vicious battle with Tāwhiri Mātia. And bravely, Hine Pū Te Hue faced the chaos, breathing in the rage exerted from Tūmataonga and Tāwhiri Mātia, holding the storm within herself. Then when exhaling, hearing the melody so full of beauty that it finally calmed the chaos. So Hine Pū Te Hue is known as the atua who possesses the powers and influence to bring peace. He hau aio, he hau aroha, he hau rangi Māori e, nau mai te hao Hine Pū Te Hue. So a few years now I've been growing hue. And she's quite tricky to grow. Once you finally get her seed to germinate successfully to a seedling, she doesn't like the cold, especially frost, needs lots of warmth and long summers. She likes to staring into the east so she can bask in the fields of Tamanui Te Rā. She loves water to fill her belly and be very well fed. Actually, I think she might be like me. Hard to grow, requires some nurturing. She takes time to grow and she takes time to dry and cure into an amazing vessel, what our ancestors used to carry water and store food in. It takes a whole year from seed to fully dried, nurturing her growth until she can become a valuable vessel. I learnt to grow hue from observing and nurturing her, and she reminds me of how I raised my kids. We haven't seen hue around much since the impacts of colonisation. She was being replaced with the production of man-made materials like plastics that were more accessible, convenient, and on demand. But they come at a cost. Hue seeds have become hard to access. And when you have some, they're a real treasure. Even more so a treasure to be able to master the technique of growing and nurturing her. I grow hue because she reclaims the holistic spiritual aspect of science. She carries the narratives to our hidden codes our ancestors left. Hine pū te hue is not just a plant, she's a deity. She's a natural phenomenon in the connection to Tāwhiri Mātia, Tūmataonga, Tupuanuku, our star of Matariki connected to growing food and crops. Our ancestors were amazing. When I see one of these, I see their wayfaring journey to Aotearoa, bringing with them these hue as vessels carrying water and preserving food. This is for sustenance, and during their long journey here, these would have been life-saving. So these are the crops that connect us to our culture. If we don't keep these connections to our past going, we lose our culture. Our mana to sustain our ownership over our culture crops and indigenous food crops is such an important element to who we are as people, but it's not just us, it's everyone. People think they have ownership over the choices of food they have to eat and where they come from. But however, the big seed producing corporates like Bayer, I think they're formerly Monsantos, DuPont, I think they've changed their name now to Corteva, plus a couple of others, they control 50% of the global seed market. They have monopolization of the seeds where they come from, and this is affecting all of us at a global level. So what do we need to do, and where do we need to start? We need to take back ownership of what is inherently ours, all of us, all of ours. That is our right to have choices where food comes from. That's number one. Number two, where do we start? Well, where I started was changing my beliefs and behaviours. I started my training in Western science and took on a valuable body of knowledge that gave me insights and exposure to lots of science applied in the fields. But it wasn't until I reconnected to my father's whakapapa and tuned into my ancestors that were waiting for me that I came to understand there was another body of knowledge in me that needed reawakening. So my life has grown through the planting of seeds, and the seeds that have already began to grow. And that was inside me, the seeds and the connection to my culture. And since then, everything has changed. My beliefs and behaviours have changed as well. So this has required a lot of adaptation and understanding that I've discovered through the strengthening of my practice with the growing of hue and my gardening. Adapting is also something that our ancestors were pretty good at. Their wayfaring journey to Aotearoa required trust in their relationship and knowledge of the environment. All of this knowledge is reflected in our tupuna, our ancestors, that they, legacy that they left us. Bear in mind, They were the descendants of these great scientists. Their legacy and codified knowledge exists in the forms of pūrākau, which are traditional narratives like hine pūtehue, karakia, tātai, our prayers and incantations, waiata haka, whakatauki, our whakatauaki, our proverbial expressions, and our treasures that we have here on display. There are so many cultural narratives like hine pūtehue that can show us a pathway to a better future. Hine pūtehue shows us the ability to calm the chaos, make peace, provide sustenance and resources, and save lives. So my connection to ngā whitu o te Taiao and every season of the year is about planning, planting, nurturing, harvesting, and giving. So that's a little bit about me. Let's talk about time. Let's be more specific. Let's talk about Santa. My whole life growing up, I had no idea who this fat man in a red suit with a fluffy beard was. But honestly, I didn't care because we were gifted presents, and that's pretty awesome for a kid. But Christmas was always weird. Which now makes sense considering in the northern hemisphere, it's frigging cold, it's snowing, people are all indoors sitting around a nice hot fire, keeping warm, filling their bellies with hot food, hanging weird decorations on trees that are makeshift fruit in winter. Meanwhile, here in the southern hemisphere, we're ripping around in shorts, sandals, it's hot, we're hanging out at the beach, we're having barbecues, and our Christmas trees are flowering poutakawa. And there are other celebrations that that we have that inherited from the northern hemisphere that don't make sense to us, like Labour Day and Guy Fawkes. So who is that? So looking back, it does seem a bit weird, but now it also seems a bit unfair. All the glory of Christmas goes with winter. So when the settlers came to the southern hemisphere and to Aotearoa, they brought with them the jolly fat man and the Gregorian calendar. And we have been subjected to northern hemisphere practices ever since. The Gregorian calendar the Gregorian calendar system is a timing system that has colonised all of us here in Aotearoa. So there is more than just one way to tell the time. The Māori New Year isn't the same as the Western year that follows a solar Gregorian calendar system or the journey of the Earth around the sun. Our ancestors followed a lunar stellar system which follows rhythms and ebbs and flows of the environment. And sitting at the heart of the timekeeping system all begins and pivots around Matariki. When Matariki rises in the morning in winter on the right lunar phase, the rest of the entire year's timekeeping system, activities, harvesting, planting, fishing, lunar phases, all attributes itself back to the rising of the star cluster Matariki. The Gregorian calendar is one way, but it doesn't align with the seasonal variations, lunar phases, and environment all here in Aotearoa. It's not compatible. Through my journey of Mara, Mahi Mara, my connection to Papatūānuku has always been strong, but now I'm learning to tune into our great marama and our other celestial deities and phenomenon. And through these lessons, it's informed accurate timing, such as when's the best time to sow seeds and when to harvest. And I'm still not an expert, but this is a lifetime of learning and practice, adding to what is inherently my genetic memory passed on to me from my tupuna, who were once great gardeners. So you've heard me mention about the lunar stellar system and that our ancestors followed. This is also known as the maramataka, or the Māori lunar calendar. The maramataka is our environmental-centric system of time. This environmental calendar puts people in place centred in the relationship with the environment. It is not compatible with the Gregorian calendar, which seeks to generalise us, universalise us, and keep us at a constant. We're always expecting consistency. Eat what we want, when we want to eat it, non-stop, throughout the whole year. No reflections, no reset, no coming together when it's cold. The Gregorian, we're just not stopping. The Gregorian calendar means when the time suits us rather than when the environment says it's time. So our tūpuna were able to identify optimal days of the month that were better suited for particular activities such as planting, fishing and harvesting. Now, it also indicated high and low energy days affecting people's emotions and productivity. Think about this. 70% of you is made up of water. Your brain is made up of water. All the way down your spinal cord is immersed in water. So if the moon can pull trillions of litres of water that makes the tides go in and out, it's also pulling waters within you. This in turn has an effect on us, how we feel, our emotions and energy levels. The maramataka is about the observation of the changes of the Taiao, the environment. The maramataka is about when we do things, the best time for planting, seeds, harvesting crops, tending to your gardens. And the maramataka also builds a connection to yourself and your sense of identity. It balances me. So since continually tuning into the maramataka more with my Matariki practice over the last few years, I've learnt that the cosmos has such a strong influence on the whole of the land. Te puanuku, te puarangi, waipunarangi, kōururangi, kai doesn't grow unless the elements above connect with it. Rain, sunlight, wind, frosts. Now, I have a mara at home, my little farmlet, that I've designed in a way to be highly productive. My mates come up for a visit and I walk around the garden and think, how do you find the time? Pretty much everybody will comment that. I do a lot of my growing kai doesn't take time. It takes specific time. The most busiest time of the year for me is spring and autumn, but it's not every day in spring. It's a specific time in spring. It's specific to the phases of the moon telling me when it's the right time. Now, what I plant in spring will determine what I'm eating in summer. So summer is about barbecues, watering gardens, and harvesting summer fruits and vegetables. Now, I don't go away during summer. If I go away during summer, I'll waste all the preparation work I did in spring because everything is coming, all the fruits and vegetables are coming on board, not online that time. And I also have an apiary of 4 beehives. Spring and summer is when they need tending to near on every week. They're a bit more high maintenance, but without the bees, my garden wouldn't be so productive. Bees are really important pollinators. So we tend to do a lot of our hosting during summer. A good time to come and visit me, really. I'm likely to be home. You're guaranteed a meke as kai growing from the gardens at home. Food is more than just sustenance. It's spiritual sustenance. It's cultural sustenance. And it reaffirms your connection to the place where you're eating food from. I love to share the kai I grow and preserve. It has mana to it. When I give that kai away, I'm giving mana to the person who receives it. When I share or trade kai, or when that kai is eaten by someone, it gives me mana. That's what manaakitanga means, enhancing the mana of others. But what we have done is severed that relationship between ourselves and food. Because we've disconnected ourselves from the environment, the maramataka isn't just about helping ourselves, it's centered around connecting and relationships. So how can we reconnect ourselves to the environment again? By understanding to read, record, make decisions based on reading the indicators in the sky and indicators in the land and sea. It's pretty easy, huh? Now, chuck away your watch, maybe. So firstly, a good starting point is for the knowledge gathering is lean on to the knowledge experts like Rangi Mātamua, Matua Rereata, Mahika, Ricky Solomon, Pounamu Skelton. There's quite a few of those knowledge holders that are really, really giving with their knowledge. So there's, or you can go to your iwi for their kōrero. There are great resources coming out now. This will give you a good basis. Secondly, learn the phases of the maramataka. Now, I started learning off just the 4 main quarters. The full moon and no moon, tangaroa, tamatia. Get to know these main phases. Try and source the maramataka that's closest to the area you live in, because there are hundreds of maramataka. If you have a whānau one, try and find that and use that. Circle these 4 quarters into the maramataka calendar. And get to know when it's full moon or rākau nui, and that is when and when there's no moon, what we call whiro. On a whiro night, you won't see the moon in the night sky. It's the best night to do stargazing, but it's not the best time to be out in the garden. Rather, it's a time to plan and reflect. It can be a low energy phase. Rākau nui is the full moon, often seen as a time when people have high energy. Think about the word luna for lunatic. It's in reference of being a bit crazy. So the tides are higher when the moon is full, because at that time, gravity from the moon and the sun are pulling together on the earth. And tamatia. So tamatia is often a time when things can be agitated. It's not really a good time to go out fishing, go into the water. It's a better time to go out into the bush for hunting. Tangaroa. Now this is my favourite phase. Tangaroa, our tupuna, use this phase for time of planting. It's our time of high productivity. So if we are planting anything under the ground, we do this during tangaroa phase. So this is why gardening doesn't take time, it takes specific time. It's like micro-planning. So the other things that need to start being aware of are ngā tohu o te whenua, or the indicators in the environment. Depending on where you live, the tohu o te whenua, the signs, the tohu, and the indicators will be different from on the land and from on the sea. And all the signs or tohu that show up in the Taiao or environment gives us information. Timing and management of planting and harvesting techniques depend heavily on tohu, on signs in the environment, such as tohu o te tau, or markers of seasonal change. An ionic example of tohu is the flowering of the puitakawa, a tohu that kina at their fattest for eating. Reading tohu is a practice of being fine-tuning. It's taken note of patterns and rhythms. When something is out of pattern or rhythm, then it might be telling me something. So living on a piece of whenua and gardening makes this ability much easier for me to practice. It's intrinsic. I've always been an observer of the environment. So when I first started growing hue, I saw her flowers for the first time. They are white, and they would open. I noticed that they'd open late in the afternoon or early evening. White flowers like the moon. I thought about hine te iwa iwa. The atua for weaving and childbirth. Hine te iwa iwa always has a pepe or a moth in her presence. It made me think moths are attracted to the moonlight. So it's the moth that pollinates hine pū te hue, not intentionally bees. So tohu are essentially limitless. From the realm of ranginui, they are influenced by the winds, stars, moon and sun. Those from tangaroa, the diver or fishes, they're influenced by the fish or movements of the tides. And in papatua, nuku, influenced by the condition of plants, trees and birds. Tohu can be experienced in many different ways, including sight, smell, creatures that approach you, music, dreams. In order to assess the health of our Taiao, we must listen, hear, feel, touch and smell. I think even when you tune into the tohu or the signs that the environment is showing you, you can become much more conscious of your surroundings. Now, I mentioned I have beehives. Last spring, I was working in my home office and I smelled what I thought was a scent of bees. My spidey senses are a heightened sense of smell. So I got up out of my office and just wandered down the driveway towards my hives. It's a fair way, so I walked straight up to a magnolia tree. There at eye level was this newly settled swarm of bees looking for a new home. So quickly I put my bee suit on and boxed them up into a new hive. So that swarm gave me a 20-litre bucket of honey last summer. So during Matariki, I'm looking to our tohunga kōkorangi, our astronomy experts, for their read on the appearance of Matariki. Will there be more rain? Will it be much drier? Will we expect longer droughts or more moisture? Our whetū, ururangi and waipunarangi, their appearance will tell us the long-term forecast. Last year's read from waipunarangi with various other tuhi o te rangis, various other cosmos type of signs, like the repetitive appearance of the kurohopo, or there's a halo around the moon. That appeared a lot last year. And in the lead up to winter last year, there was this appearance of maruaunui. So maruaunui is a phenomenon known as the deep, dark, red and purple sunsets and sunrises. I'm not sure if any of you had noticed there was a lot of the appearance of maruaunui last year. That is a tohu that could be a lot of moisture and rains coming for the year. What was our year like last year? So from these reads, it made me decide not to plant too many root crops like kumara, because they could just rot in the ground with all the extra moisture and the soils and the risk of flooding. So instead I planted vegetables that love water. And I had a bumper crop of pumpkins, kamo, and mahue flourished. So ngā uru, or autumn, we wait for the stronger winds and the two big rain events to arrive. The second rain event is when we expect the tunaheke, or the eels, to make their migration down to the sea. Our kaimoana gatherers, this is a time that they wait at the river mouth at the right moon phase to catch the tuna as they migrate from the rivers. The tuna also purge their bellies for their migration and turn a pale white colour. Our tupuna knew this was the best time for their eating. So we need to sync to the seasons, be cognizant of the demands on it, our demands on the environment. Nowadays we get too busy with our constant state of pace and failure to notice these signs. Tohu are indicators from the environment, observed and developed by us to monitor, signal and forecast potential changes in the environment. Get it wrong and you won't have a successful harvest to feed your tribe. Gardeners had to be well skilled up and super connected to the environment, otherwise it would have put the whole tribe at risk. Do you notice signs, or are you disconnected? Okay, let's think about artificial intelligence. It's quite the thing with technology. The basis of artificial intelligence is pattern recognition, fine-tuning, detecting the algorithms to gain insight, and used as a decision-making tool. But here's one thing. Artificial intelligence is only as good as the information you put into it. Artificial intelligence has had human-centric information put into it, and look what it created. A narcissistic personality with no morals, ethics, or conscience. It's pretty scary. Our tupuna had their own fine-tuned framework of pattern recognition, centred around interconnectedness of relationship with the environment, fine-tuned over hundreds of years of environmental observations, algorithms developed, insights discovered from informed decision-making. Wouldn't that be a thing to return to? So AI is only as good as the information you put into it. Perhaps it needs to be environmentally centric information. Is that our response to climate change? Environmentally centric pattern recognition and algorithms populating intelligence. So by applying tupuna ancestral wisdom, I reignite my Indigenous world view and raise my consciousness of our mataranga, our knowledge, to realign our interconnected relationships with the environment. Being more conscious of the signs in the environment and what they are telling you and its relationship to you and the relationship to other signs in the environment helps shift your behaviour and influence on your decisions, environmentally based decisions. So Matua Rereata Mahika described, nothing was ever created or merged into this world to live in isolation. Even a hidden face can be detected by its impact on something. When we are present, we notice change, and the change is the hidden face I'm talking about. So we think about how the subtle signs and signals in nature might reveal strategies for the planting of the most plentiful crops and how it can support the sustainability of your mara and also regenerate the natural environment for all those who source their well-being from it. He kōrero i ngaro, he kākano hau e runga wai i Rangiatia. I'll never be lost, for I am a seed which was sown in the heavens of Rangiatia. So my life has grown through the planting of seeds, and as the seeds grow, I grow. So I'm a conduit, the connection between knowledge and practice. One hand, I'm being held by my ancestors. The other hand, I'm reaching out to my descendants. We plant seeds. We take seeds as a reset. We reflect back to the plan. Then we reflect back for the future. We reflect back and then plan for the future. Yeah. We can take all the observations and learnings from planting that seed and how well it flourished. Did it grow? So my purpose today here with you is to plant a seed. There are literally seeds here to plant. Some hue seeds. So go ahead, give them a go. Just remember they're a taonga and they'll show you a lot. So kia ora tātou.
Tēnā koe, tēnā koe Francine, tēnā koe ka nui te mihi. Thank you so very much for that kōrero. Oh, are you playing this? Am I meant to shut up now? Sorry. Kia ora e hoa, Francine. Thank you. And I know some of you might have questions, but I'll just get you to hold off until we've actually finished our speakers. Then they're going to sit up the front here and you can ask them some questions. But thank you, Francine. Francine gave me some hue seeds last year, and I planted them back home in Ruatahuna. My neighbour's pigs ate them. So I just went and got my hue from Francine's house. Engari tēnā koe, Francine. Our next speaker is Puke. Is it Puke or is it Tame? It's Tame. It's Tame, but I see Puke's presentation on there. Okay, haramai then. Next we've got Tame Malcolm, no Rotorua, Rotoiti, Ngāti Tarawhai, Ngāti Pikiao, Ngāti Ngārara Nui, Tapuika, me Ngāti Rua Nui, born and raised in Rotorua. He has spent his entire career working in pest management and te ao Māori approaches to predator control. He's currently doing his PhD in traditional pest management methodologies and understandings. He also runs his own pest management company, is currently working for Doc, and is also a stunt double for Brad Pitt. So please, ho mai te paki paki, Tame Malcolm.
Kia ora. Can you hear me all right? Oh, tēnā tātou. Similar to Francine, I brought something I made earlier as well. So, hoia no. As you all know, don't think literally. As you all know, Rangi's famous for many things. The first being Matariki and his academic prowess. Manawatia Matariki, Asan. The second is his unwavering support of the hurricanes. And I say unwavering because there's given plenty of reasons to waver that support. And then lastly is hunting. But not many people realise he does a bit of hunting, and that's actually how we met. I was at a conference, and I think he might have been a keynote speaker, and I was fairly new into the space of research, and he approached me and he said, "Oh, do you hunt?" And I thought, wow, what's this famous person doing, talking to me? And I said, yeah, and he goes, "Oh, I hunt as well." And then it became apparent what he was talking to me for. He said, "Oh, have you got any hunting spots? I really want to find a hunting spot." And it was from there our connection grew. And it was actually him that encouraged me to pursue a PhD in pest management. When I first started working in this space, straight out of school, there'd be times where I would hide my mātauranga, so karakia, and they'll become apparent why later, but I'd hide karakia from my colleagues or when we do pest management. And then fast forward about 10 years later, talk to Rangi and someone who's made Matariki sort of what it is today, taken something from the quintessential depths of te ao Māori and made it accessible for everyone on an international stage. It was the inspiration I needed, I think, to actually watch some stuff from te ao ngā tupuna that we can use in this day and age to help protect our environment. And thus, my journey into a Māori approach to pest management or conservation started. So, when they asked us what taonga would you like on stage to help with your kōrero, I did say, "Oh, I'd like a big moa. If you can get that big giant moa and roll that out." And they said, "Oh, that's a bit hard. Have you got anything else?" And so I said, "Oh, a big wharenui." And they said, "You're closer with the moa." So I settled with some manu. I said, "If you've got any manu, bring those out and I can use that for my kōrero." And also the kiore. And then as Francine was talking, I thought I'd better write my notes to talk about things because there's so much to talk about in this section alone. I thought I'd better limit myself to just focusing on a few. But the first is the moa. Kia ora, cameraman. The first was the moa. And many people, if you've heard me speak before, this will be this will be a similar kōrero that I give elsewhere. But unlike Rangi, I don't have many new ideas. I like to perpetuate the same ideas. But I think if we can get this understanding out there and about, I'll be happy for it. And the first one is the moa. To bust that myth that Māori hunted the moa to extinction. I don't know what there's teaching now in school, but when I was at school, that was the prime thing that Māori hunted the moa to extinction. Did everyone else taught that? Show of hands. Yeah, you're all past the 2000s. You're all schooled. You're all old as well. But moa were killed by Māori. And at the time, I remember thinking, like, it seems pretty. they seemed to really hammer it, that Māori just didn't have an understanding of the environment, that they wanted the moa to go extinct. And it was really drilled home in some real odd ways. However, as I got more interested in this space, I started learning about some of the actual insights and knowledge in the moa space. So the first one is that when the moa went extinct, there was only 2,000 individuals living in New Zealand, give or take, 2,000 individuals. They think the moa population was between 1 and 2 million. Now, if you give someone like Rangi, who hunts quite a bit, the best technology and get 2,000 of them, I doubt you'd be able to kill 2 million moa. No offense to Rangi's hunting skills, but it doesn't make sense that 2,000 individuals can kill all that many moa. But yet it's still perpetuated. There's still places that say Māori hunted the moa to extinction. However, I'm not debating that the presence of Māori led to the moa extinction. Kia tūpato-san. It's more so that the presence of kuri and kiore would have no doubt had an impact on the moa population. Now let's start from the start when our tupuna first arrived. They came from the islands. On the islands, when, as we all know, the Pacific Islands or the Polynesian Islands are on a migratory path of birds. So when birds would land on the islands, the mātauranga at the time suggested grab as many as you can, harvest them, preserve them in, I don't want to steal Puke's thunder, and things like this, preserve the manu, knowing that next season they'll be back in the same abundance. So when Māori got here, that was our mātauranga, that was our tikanga, was when you see birds, harvest them as much as you can. So they get to New Zealand. Over in the islands, a moa was the Polynesian word for a chicken, something this big. They get to Aotearoa and they see something 2 meters, and oh, that is a moa, I want that in my belly. So they start hunting them as per mātauranga dictates. And then after about 100, 150 years, they start realizing that actually if we carry on this path, we might not have any more left to hunt. At that stage as well, they were sending more back, preserved more back to the islands. Not many people realize that, that our second export was actually more meat, preserved more meat in the original Uber Eats. As a guess, can anyone think of the first export? One of the first major exports. Kupe took some back when Kupe first came here. Probably some people wearing it around their necks, ponam. So for a while they were also exporting ponam as another myth buster. And when people say that it's not a Māori whakaaro to export, I'm like, actually our tupuna were exporting pounamu and more well before European arrival. So yeah, we obviously knew what to do. So the moa, so we're sending it back to the islands, and then we started noticing that the populations were diminishing. And that's at about that 150-year mark, 200-year mark, we start seeing a change. We see a change. We see a change from this harvesting culture and taking to a more regular diet. So we start seeing this regular diet become mainstream in Aotearoa. So people start realizing we have to hunt by the seasons. We can't just take this kai whenever we want. We have to follow certain seasons so that they are preserved in time. So the seasons become part of mainstay life, become part of our tikanga and our culture, and our maramataka. And then if you were caught hunting outside those seasons, it was instant kill. You were not following the seasons, so it was death to that person. And essentially that showed the importance of the environment. If you weren't living by the environment and weren't part of the environment and weren't having those connections that Francine talked about, you were no good to anyone, and it was death. So everyone became part of the environment. We weren't sitting outside the environment watching it, we were part of the environment. So if the environment suffered, we suffered. And then 200 years after arrival, we see it kicks off big things like rahui and pātu watawata and mara. The reason I say rahui is everyone knows what a rahui is. It's a ban. It usually has three things. It's designation of a location, a time, and a reason. The reason is usually to keep ourselves spiritually safe, and in some cases it was keep ourselves physically safe, and that was preserve that food so we can eat next season. Back in the day, if you broke that rahui, if you breached that rahui, if you took a kereru from a place that had a rahui on it, you were killed. No ifs or buts. It was a very black and white law. The second aspect, if you didn't get, if you went and pinched, if you were a good poacher, you could get that kēreru and get out of there. The iwi, or the local people, would kill the person in charge of the guard, basically the security guard. So if you were on guard duty and someone stole a kēreru, you had every ounce of determination to kill that person, because if you didn't, your neck was literally on the line. And interesting enough, everyone knows what a tohunga is. Tohunga, like Rangi, he's our main tohunga of this day and age. They were like the big, I was going to say king dingalings, but but they were very important. They were very important back in the day. Kia tūpato-san. And if someone breached a rahui and you couldn't kill the perpetrator, no one was on guard duty, it was the tohunga who was killed. The tohunga. Again, it goes to show you that the environment is bigger than all of us. It doesn't care what place you were in your village hierarchy, the environment was number one. Am I suggesting we go back to a state like that where we kill people that disregard the environment? No. Would I like to? No. Hoi anō. So about 200 years after arrival, we see the establishment of what would be a conservation system, or living with the environment. A change from Polynesian culture to Māori culture. And that transition is often it's talked about quite often. Some people talk about it as a change from the Moa hunter period to Māori period, pā life. There's a few different other transitions, but to me the key thing is we see a transition in the way our Māori culture interacts with our taonga species. And some of it's really apparent, like I talked about the rahui, the change in culture. Some of it's more subtle, like the Māori word for extinction is mate a moa, death like the moa. And sometimes you'll hear people saying, kua ngaro pērā ki te moa, or warewaretia, pērā ki te moa, is forgotten or lost like the moa. And in paying homage to the moa was a real taonga, and because of Māori actions, not hunting, but because of Māori actions, led to their demise. Fast forward a couple hundred years, ki te pai koe son? I'm doing a good job of multitasking here, eh? Not one ta. Fast forward a couple hundred years, and we have the arrival of the Europeans. And with them came pests. And obviously, pests had an impact on our taonga species. They also had an impact on the connection with our taonga species. And they had an impact on the systems that we had established to look after the environment and to ensure our connections to the environment remained. So the first thing we started noticing with pest control was the demise of more species. Rats turned up in about the 1800s. Come the early 1900s, the government at the time realised, actually, we've got to do something about these pests. From that, the deer culling was born. But the precursor to that was the question, how do we know the forest is in bad health? How do we know it's in terrible health? We can see some species are going missing, the species that we like to eat, kaka, kakapo, kea, kēreru. But how do we actually know the forest is actually in bad health? And then some tupuna said to the government at the time, you should listen to the tui. So everyone knows the tui. I'll touch this one. Tui, kōkō, I think there's 14 names for a tui. Rangi will know 13 of them, I think. But they said, you should listen to the tui. And the Crown at the time, or the Borough Council at the time said, oh, that sounds like black magic. Why would I listen to a bird? That seems weird. If the bird's there, the forest must be healthy. Dismissed it. And it wasn't until, that seems very dangerous. It wasn't until a few generations later that it was explained. Now, I'll run you through it. A tui spends 12 weeks on the nest, gets healthy, and then at that stage, it leaves the nest, and it spends the next 2 years of its life going around the forest. A lot of people talk about parrots as something that mimics people. In Aotearoa, it's the tui. Tui is a really good parrot, or a really good mimicker. So good, in fact, that people have heard tui mimic car alarms, the sounds of washing machines, the sounds of electric fences shorting, and they'll pick up the sounds, anything in the forest. But in the 2 years it's trying to pick up all of these sounds, its goal is to make this unique sound, or unique waiata, that no one else has heard before in order to attract a mate. And how it does that, it picks up the smallest sounds in the forest, the most unique sounds. So if you're in a forest where you've got a lot of kōkako, the tui's going to say, I don't want to sound like a kōkako. Everyone sounds like that. If there's only a few, what are they called? Waxeye, what's the other name? Toho. If there's a bunch of toho in the forest, they'll pick up that. Oh, if there's only a small amount of those, they'll pick up that. So what the Māori were trying to say back in the day, or the people that went there, was if you listen to the tui, it will give you an idea of what birds are in really low numbers within that forest, i.e. what birds are in dire need of protection. And from that, you'll be able to tell whether the forest is healthy, i.e. if the tui is sounding like a kōkako, you'll know that the kōkako is in dire health. And we know that the kōkako is a terrible mother when it comes to nesting, and rats love eating kōkako nests. So if a tui sounds like a kōkako, you know, oh, actually we need to do some rat control in this forest. On the tui though, as I mentioned before, really good at mimicking. So good in fact that they'll pick up a human voice and they'll sound exactly like that human. Like if I was to have a pet tui, it would sound like me with my Te Aroa dialect, and if Rangi had a pet tui, it would sound like an angel from Te Uruwera. But really good, and if you get a chance, watch Woof Woof the Tui on YouTube. Gives you a good indication of what they sound like, very much like a human. Our tupuna knew this as well. So back in the day, going back to when I talked about rahui, some of our tupuna would get pet tui and teach it makutu, curses, swear words. How did they atskupa with their makutu in Pākehā? Curses is probably the best. Stuff you didn't want to hear. And they'd teach these things and they'd place it where rahui was. So anyone unaware that would come to this area and say, oh, this looks like a good place to get some kai, they'd hear some makutu in the wind, in the trees basically. Someone with a human sounding voice sending all these curses. Obviously they can't see anyone. Their first thought would be, oh, this is some cursed place, I better get out of here. We also see it used in, when it came to battle. So sometimes ope taua, or war parties, would have pet tui, and there might be 5 or 6 people, but they'd all have a pet tui. As they come up to an iwi, they start a haka and the tui start with them. So what they see is 5 or 6 people coming, but they hear 12 people coming. It makes them second guess whether they want to attack that person, that group, because are there some ghost riders with these people, or is there extra people? And lastly, with the karanga. Sometimes if we didn't have too many people in the pā and we had a guest coming and we weren't too sure if they were friend or foe, the wahine would stand up, do the karanga, but she'd have a tui on her shoulder, usually covered by her hair as well. So when she did the karanga, the tui would also do the karanga and sound exactly like her. And so if they were a war party, thoughts on trying to raid, they'd see a lone woman standing there doing a karanga, but hear 2 or 3 voices, and it would make them second guess whether they want to actually attack someone who's got the power to call upon the spirits. So some real practical uses as well. There was one, I've forgotten where, he's just distracted me. Better check my notes. I'll come back to the tui. I feel like there was another kōrero on that. So our tupuna were saying, indicator species can tell you what the forest health is doing. You just need to listen. You need to establish those connections. And we missed the opportunity in the 1900s to pick up on that. However, in this day and age, it's quite common within conservation systems to use indicator species. But it's not just ones that we know and hear of today that can help guide us in conservation and pest management efforts as well. It's some of our forgotten friends as well, forgotten taonga. For the last wee while, I've been obsessed with huia. And I don't know why, but I've been obsessed with huia, and I've been doing a lot of research, and I didn't know it at the time, but it actually helped guide some of my research. So as we all know, huia, you probably, it's got its name from the call. Apparently it used to sound like a huia. Actually, I remember the tui stuff, we'll go back. The tui. So, like I said, it was able to pick up on sounds as it went through its life cycle. And our tupuna could listen to the sound of a tui and get an idea of what was present in the forest. For us in Te Aroa or Ngāti Tarawhai, unfortunately, we don't have many tui left. We have a lot of magpies, and the magpies have influenced our tui. So our tui have an Australian accent. They sound like magpies. So now when we go and we think, oh, there's a few magpies here, there's actually only one sort of family of magpies, but there's a lot of tui placed around. And everyone keeps saying, oh, you've got so many magpies here. And it's like, it's those damn tui, we need to get rid of the accent. Another place that became apparent, a couple of years ago, you would have heard the story that there was, everyone thought the South Island kōkako was still alive. It's long been extinct, according to some. I'm not sure, I'm on the fence. So they said, no, we heard the sound of a South Island kōkako. And the last known sighting, I think, was earlier on in the 1900s. So they said, no, there's some here, but what some of the locally we think is actually it was a tui that years ago, generations of tui ago, they heard a kōkako and they stitched that into their song. And then as generations of tui passed on that same song, what we're hearing today is just the descendants of the original tui that heard the kōkako, the South Island kōkako. And they actually have a word for it, is the kārangaranga, or the echo of a South Island kōkako. It's just the tui that's picked up on that years and years ago. So there are some, when we talk about using indicator species, there are some, some pitfalls, magpies and extinct species coming back to life. Now, back to the huia. Growing up, I remember hearing the kōrero that huia were named after the song it made, the huia. I'm not going to do it because you'll think the dying bird, but huia is apparently what it used to say. There was also another theory that, there was another theory out there as well that when our tupuna first arrived, the huia looked like the uia bird from Tahiti. Looked and sounded like it. I don't know if there's any truth to that, and I don't know. Is it ornithologist? Is that a bird person? Yeah. I need to ask an ornithologist if there's an uia in Tahiti. But I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. And then the theory goes on to further say that that's why there are manu rangatira. That's why rangatira would wear the huia feather in their hair, because the uia was a manu rangatira from Tahiti. So when our tupuna got here, they said, oh, that's another manu rangatira. Oh, Kaimatu will use those kurutau as well. We'll put the feathers in our hair. And I thought, oh, that's a cool story. And then as I started, again, getting obsessed with them, I thought, wonder what the real reason is. Wonder why our tupuna use those as a manu rangatira. Another theory I picked up on, or I heard, and I thought was really, all of these are real beautiful as well, by the way, is the sexual dimorphism. Females have the curved beak, and the males have the straight beak. And it was the idea being that in te ao Māori, he mana ori te tāte wahine, he mana ori te tāte tāne. Women and females and males, they sit on the same level. They have different roles and responsibilities, but the mana they have is equal. And this bird shows us that through sexual dimorphism. They will never compete for food. The female will eat food. There's different theories, but the male will pick at the bark with his straight beak and get the insects in there, and then the female will later come through and get the deeper ones. So the male does the hard work, the female has an easier job to get the food. And so, so the idea being that that's why it's a rangatira, to remind rangatira that actually everyone has a role to play, but you should always treat people equally, and everyone's got the same mana. Oh, that's beautiful, I like that, to remind us about that mana orite. And then on my journeys, I found another one, and it was our friend Te Aorere Pia Whairangi. Him and I were talking about manu, and he started reciting all the whakapapa of the different manu. And he started with huia. Tāne, ka moia tāne ia punaweko, ka puta mai ko huia, koia te take he manu rangatira. Tāne slept with punaweko, and the first child of that was the huia. That's why it's a manu rangatira, it's the eldest. And that's why it's the first bird to sing in the morning. I was like, oh, that's another beautiful story as well. And you'll see from those two stories, and in the third one, oh, there's heaps more as well. The next theory was through, again, a friend of ours, Jay Wilson, another tohunga mātai whetū, Rano Jay. I asked him, I said, bro, why is the huia a manu rangatira? Why do rangatira wear it in their hair? And it's only rangatira that will wear it in their hair. And he said, it's because when our tupuna first arrived, as they were travelling through the forest, if they got lost or disorientated, they knew they could find their way if they found some tūtohu whenua, mountains, big landscapes that they could recognise where they're at and find their way out. However, sometimes the forest is really hard to navigate. But they knew that the huia lives on the outskirts of the forest. Similar to a kōkako that jumps between branches, the huia would be found on the outskirts of forest. So if you followed the huia, you would get to a clearing or you get to the outside of the forest, thus be able to find your way. So the huia was a bird that would lead you to safety. So over time, our tupuna realised that actually, when we're in trouble, everyone will look to the rangatira to find, I'm not pointing to myself, sorry, they'd look to the rangatira to find their way out. And so the rangatira would wear these in their hair to say, actually, if you are in trouble, follow me, I will get you to safety. I thought, oh, again, another beautiful story. Now, if you ask Rangi Mātāmua really nicely for his story of why huia are a manu rangatira, I'm sure he'll share that with you as well, because I think it was beautiful as well. But all of those kōrero around the sound that the huia makes, when it sings in the morning, and where it lived, they all gave us an idea of the ecology, or the part that the huia played in the ecosystem. They all gave us some indication. So by me just going down this pathway of understanding something that's part of our culture, I was able to learn a lot about the bird, what this bird does, and inform sort of the understanding of the ecosystem. And it was through that I realised actually there's a lot of aspects of our culture that can teach us that. So when it comes time to conservation management, we often look at the problem right here in front of us and look at where we want to get to, but we don't look to the past, which is obviously what Matariki is about, past, present, future. Actually, by understanding the huia, I can understand some of the impacts or what impacted on it. So we know it was rats because they had a similar lifestyle to kōkako, but I also know the way it lived through understanding these stories. And with that, if we are wanting to bring some of our species back from the brink of extinction, it's really important to understand the ecosystems that the roles that they play within their ecosystems. I'll fast forward, what's my notes say? Kia ore. Yeah, so the last one with huia is, huia did make it up until last century, the 1900s. And there were many things that led to its demise, but ultimately it was over-harvesting. Rats had a huge impact on the nest sites, but I mean, if you Google anything, it will say basically when people realised that the huia was a manu rangatira, a lot of people overseas said, oh, I want to be a rangatira, I want some of those feathers, and thus a black market was born. All right, on to kia ore. And time's going well. So kia ore, I've talked about it a few times and the impacts that they had on the different manu that I've talked about as well. And by kia ore, I mean both the native kia ore and the introduced ones. These are both introduced. And like I said at the start, when I first sort of left school and got into pest management, I would wait. So I started off as a goat culler. So our job was to spend 8 to 10 hours in the bush hunting goats. And what we'd do is we'd get flown into the middle of nowhere, just hunt as many goats as we could with our dogs. At the end of 10 days, 15 days, whatever it was, come back and give them an idea of how many goats we killed, and then figure out if that's having an impact on the forest health. Before we'd go out hunting, before we'd leave camp or the hut, I'd wait till everyone else left and I'd do my karakia then, and then shoot off to the bush and hunt. And I hid it away for fear of any repercussions or for fear of saying, oh, what are you doing? That doesn't work, or leave that shit alone. And then I'd do my practices as I got out into the forest. And the main one was any new place we went to, the first animal we'd kill, I know this might sound gory, but the heart, I'd take the heart out of the goat and hang it in the tree. And what we were taught growing up is that heart would in turn feed the insects, which would then in turn feed the birds, and the birds would then propagate the seeds. So by putting the heart in the tree, it helped complete the circle of life and stimulate a healthier forest. So it was a Māori way to sort of acknowledge the work we're doing and also help the forest get healthier. So I'd do that every place we went. And I remember down in King Country one time I did it, got back to camp, and some guys were like, oh my God, I just ran into the weirdest sight. I saw a heart in the tree. Someone had stuck the guts of an animal in a tree. There's a weirdo out there on the loose and we need to do something about it. And it was then I sort of had to admit to my colleagues, like, actually guys, sorry, that was me. That's part of this practice that I do. And they were interested. To their credit, they were like, oh, that's fascinating. That's quite cool. And some of them actually wanted to try do it themselves, and they said, oh, is there a karakia to learn, or is there, how do we go about it? And I said, actually, no, there's no karakia to learn in this sense. It's your intentions are you want a healthier forest, and here's an action you can do. Fast forward to my research, it came up as well, like, how can we get rid of rats? What are some ways we can get about rats? And I don't know if you know a rat, but they've got very little hearts, and you cannot hang that in a tree. It's tiny. But I went back to karakia. And I remember thinking at the time, wonder what karakia would work for rat trapping. And then I came across a cool kōrero from this old guy in Kawhia who gave me, a lot of what I'm talking about is pretty much from that guy, and he's since passed. And unfortunately, I'd never called his name. I was out goat culling, and we'd just have a cup of tea every time I went back to camp, and he'd give me all this knowledge, and I thought, this is amazing. But with rats, he said there used to be a karakia that our tupuna would do for rats. It would encourage them to go into our traps. And I thought, oh, yep, I've heard that before. That's quite common. You'll see it in, if you go around Te Papa, you'll also see something about that as well, the different karakia to encourage kiore to go into to traps. But as I dove into it more, and from this kaumātua in Kawhia, he said that some of the karakia were based off the sounds of ruru. Now, ruru are a predator of kiore. So as a kiore, if you hear the sound of a ruru, the first thing you're going to want to do is find safety, which happens to be not quite this, but something like this, something that you've built that will guide them into a trap that will hopefully catch you. Actually, probably something more akin to this at the back here, a noose trap that will catch kiore. So we had these karakia that were based off the sounds of ruru that would encourage kiore to go into our traps and thus catching us kai. Now I remember again talking about this with researchers saying that, oh, there's some karakia that can increase rat traps, catches. And that, first thing was, oh, that sounds like black magic, or it sounds like wishful thinking. But then when I said, actually, it's based off the sounds of ruru, they were like, oh, that sounds like a lure or a sound lure. And I was like, exactly. So another thing, if you can take anything away from this, is don't be quick to dismiss mātauranga. I mean, some people hear a karakia for pest management, dismiss it as black magic, but actually if we dive into it, there's a lot of logic in it, and it makes a lot of sense. But it's not just anecdotal stuff. Rangi's famous for living by the stars. I did trapping by the stars, and it didn't get as famous as he did. But trapping by the stars, I thought, actually, our tupuna used to trap by seasons. Like Francine said, there was a rhyme and reason for everything that was done in the environment at different times of the year. Kia tūpato-san, kia pakaru, kana mai. So, trapping by the stars. So I started interviewing some kaumātua, looking at different writings of tupuna. When did they trap kiore, and what did that look like? And it started, I found one little passage that in February, and sorry bro, what's the Māori word for February? The Māori moon? Huitangaru. Okay, it wasn't that one. What's waru? Yeah, what? Cool, there we go. I read something and it said that at this time of the year, January, February, that was the best time to trap kiore because they were after, let's see, no, there's none in here. Kihiki, cicadas. So as we know, cicadas come out around that time, especially tōtara. They'll latch onto tōtara to get rid of the old skins, or the old shells. Have you ever seen those? Cicada shells? They would get rid of them, and the kiore would use that as their protein fix. They'd wait there, wait till these things latch on and are stuck, and then would run and eat them. So our tupuna knew this. So around that time when you see kihiki, and it wasn't fixed that come January, you have to get out there, is once you see those cicadas coming out, that's when you know that kiore are going to be around those places. So I applied that to my trapping of rats. Thought, actually, come that time, I'll put some rat traps around these tōtara where these cicadas are. Now, in the trapping, or in the pest control industry, we've got some standards that help guide how you trap, best practice or standard operating procedures. So I thought, just to make it even, I'll do a couple of lines, trapping lines, along these SOPs, but I'll use some of this other knowledge to try trap rats. And it started with cicadas, then it went into meadleberries, kaikatea berries, tawa berries, and I just kept following that pattern. So there'll be some weeks where there was nothing, I couldn't find anything to suggest what I trapped to, so I'd just leave the traps. But the other traps I kept running as per industry standards and whatnot. By the end of it, by the end of it, the trapping based on the maramataka, or trapping by the stars, had a 14% increase compared to those traps. Not only that, it was cheaper. These standard traps, you usually use peanut butter as a lure, or if you're trapping possums, it's icing, sugar and flour. But these traps, all I would do was use the cicadas. If I see some cicadas, put a trap by it, and the rats just happen to get caught in it. The possums just happen to get caught in it. When it came to kaikate berries with the first in March, I'd just take a couple of berries and smear it above the tree. As the rat or the possum comes along trying to get this, these berries in the tree, they said, oh, there's some easy ones right there on the trunk, and would get caught in the trap. So again, not only did I have an increase in trap catch rates, but I had cheaper inputs. I didn't need to worry about the flour or the peanut butter. The only thing I did have to worry about was moving the traps around, but that encouraged me to learn more about the maramataka, or more about the knowledge that our tupuna used. So by understanding this new way of trapping, which was from an old way of trapping, and these Māori approaches, not only was I able to restore our forest, but also restore some knowledge within my whānau that had been long since just left the books. And then lastly, where I'm at with my PhD, and sorry, Maria Barge is my supervisor, and she said, don't say anything about your PhD, it's not published, still along, but I thought, it's worth sharing some of this stuff because I do find it interesting, and I'd rather seek forgiveness than get permission. But when it came to what's a Māori approach to pest management, there was a ton of ideas, but one of the sort of key themes that popped out in some of my interviews was atua. What atua would guide pest management? And similarly, Te Rangi with living by the stars, tāwhiri mātea, atua underpin a lot of what we know as te ao Māori, our culture. So I thought, there must be an atua when it comes to pest control. And there is atua that guide the harvesting of kai, there's atua that guide protecting taonga, but when it came to pest control, because these are a foreign species, there wasn't any atua that I could sort of say, that's the atua for pest control. There are elements, like in Te Arawa, when it comes to a lot of the taonga we use for harvesting, tumatauenga is the atua. So when Rangi and Papa split, there was a big battle amongst the gods afterwards. And tumatauenga knew he couldn't kill all his siblings. He thought, no, otherwise we'll be locked in battle for eternity. To get my own, I'm going to actually kill their children. I'll kill their offspring. So he went about inventing things to kill the children of his siblings. So for Tangaroa, he invented the net, the fishhook. For Tāne Mahuta, he invented things that would catch the birds, the spear, the nets, the noose, so on and so forth. For Rongo, he invented the shovel, the kō. And I thought, oh yeah, tumatauenga could guide our, the tools we use for pest control. Essentially the tools used to killing. I thought, oh, maybe it's tumatauenga. And then there was Tūmai and Te Aorere Pewharangi, again some knowledgeable people from Te Ao Māori. They said, actually, wouldn't it be whiro? And when Tāne went to climb the heavens to get the baskets of knowledge, whiro, the god of darkness and disease, he said, no, it shouldn't be Tāne, it should be one of us older siblings getting it. So I will attack Tāne with pests and diseases. And so the theory goes for them is that whiro is still continuing to attack Tāne to this day with the introductions of pests. And I thought, I like that one as well. And then as I started interviewing people and going around the country, I found that everyone's got a different atua. For some, iwi and Taranaki, where I'm also from, is rongo, the god of peace. Which you think, oh, that's interesting, the god of peace. How would the god of peace be used to kill a pest? And it was more to protect his children, or the kumara, that they use pest control when it comes to the kumara caterpillar. So again, every atua, everywhere I went, everyone had a different atua that would guide their kōrero, or guide their philosophy and their thinking. Where I got to with my one is that I'm still not sure. Within Te Ao Māori, there's always going to be a different atua depending on who you talk to. And because I'm up here, I'm going to tell you the right one is Te Arawa. No, I'm not. And that I think that's a kōrero we need to have when it comes to pest management, is actually what does a Māori approach look like? Rather than just going about killing something willy-nilly, what's the philosophy that underpins it? Because we all know that doing pest control leads to a healthy environment, but actually what are the philosophies and what are the outcomes we want? So with that, I will finish my kōrero before this fellow does jump off the stage. Engari, tēnei ka mihi kia koutou. Tēnā tātou katoa. Tēnā mai. Pupi ikihi. Pupi ikihi.
Tēnā koe hoa, Tame. Thank you very much, Tame. Multi-talented, multitasking. I really enjoyed the kōrero about the tui sounding like other birds, so you know what's in trouble in the forest. I did have a question though, like, what happens if a tui sounds like a tui? Kia ora. So we're coming to our third presenter, Puke Timoti, who is an ecologist at Manaki Whenua Land Care Research, and he works at the intersection between Mātauranga Māori and Western science to gain insights into biodiversity and environmental management. So Puke is from Ruatahuna, from the heart of Te Urewera, but Puke is someone who grew up with traditional knowledge, in particular of the forest, which has been his life since he was a small boy, taught by his grandfathers and many elders from Ruatahuna. And I'm really excited for him to share some of his insights and to knowledge, and in particular speak about some of the taonga and the species that we have on the table in front of us. So please, a round of applause for Puke Timoti.
Kia ora tātou. Bit of a hard act to follow from Francine, Tame and Kaiwhare. I would just like to start by saying a quick karakia of a whare maire, whare wānana of Ruatahuna, because we have taonga that are tapu, that have mana, that have connection to me and my context. And the kōrero is, he whaka mai I te kāhui ariki, he whaka mānawa I te kāhui atua ki te whare maire o Mairerangi. Quickly translated as to venerate a league of esteemed people, to assemble a holy assembly to the house of Mairerangi. Now, Mairerangi is a certain house of law taught in traditional times where Rangi Mātāmua's knowledge originated from. So my name is Puke Timoti. I'm going to quickly get through this presentation here that I've prepared because I didn't know what was on offer on display, and I'm going to flip the chart and try and bring some of these taonga that we have with us to life. Oops. Much like my title, it's been last 48 hours has been quite joyous, and I hope many of you have filled your kete to the brim of knowledge about Matariki in the last 48 hours. It's been real. We were here last year when the ceremony was officially celebrated, and it was a real privilege to witness Western science and Mātauranga Māori being celebrated here at that time in the last 48 hours. I am very proud to be Māori, to be Tūhoe, but also to be New Zealander, to be talking about Mātauranga Māori in this space. So kia ora, turangi. The fatness of the land. Sorry to be a little bit sour on the opening topic, but realistically, we are living an unprecedented time. At a scale and pace of our human impact on nature over the last century has been enormous, particularly over the last 50 years. We are dealing with biodiversity loss and environmental degradation and climate change at a rate never seen before in our human history. We are potentially pushing into planetary boundaries that have not been witnessed before, and it is unprecedented. As a result, they have far-reaching consequences for our human, social, cultural, and economic and overall well-being. And I think what Rangi has done with Matariki has brought the three and all those facets of our social connection, our environmental connection, and the economic connection to the fore with Matariki, in which they respond to. So these are my elders that helped raise me back in Ruatahuna. Their knowledge corresponds with the global biodiversity loss globally. And there is a increasing body of knowledge that talks about the connection between culture and biological diversity. And where there is indigenous peoples found, there is often biodiversity integrity still attached. So amidst the recognition of human responsibility for causing much of this destruction to our planet, we are also the solution to much of this cause. And what Rangi has brought to the fore has been inspirational in terms, as ecologists and conservationists, we often deal with siloed human nature separation of our human nature relationship, and is often dealt with quite separately, when in fact Māori and indigenous peoples deal with issues of that nature, are talked about with both culture, ecological and economic well-being. So nature and culture, knowledge and practice. Many of the artifacts that you see here today are just that. They are now museum pieces. They are tangible pieces that have been kept behind closed doors. And I'm hoping to bring a lot of this knowledge to life. I want to talk about kaina. So kaina is your home. And our home here in New Zealand, we need to think about what do we want for our kaina. And part of the word kaina is the word ka, or ahi ka, a lit fire, or a fire that is simmering and that is blazing. So kaina is our connection to our place and our home. So what I want to talk about is what do we want within our kaina. Back in Ruatahuna growing up, we had a number of rocks at a kōpaiahi. Kōpaiahi is a campfire, and they were called ahite ki, ahite ka. And it was often sung as a riddle or a children's rhyme. And these rocks often reflected the heat from the fire. And we would go back every year to restoke that fire, that our connection would remain. And our connection, well, for me and Rangi, we return to reignite our fires of place, to make sure that we are grounded, considering all the burdens of this world. But it's important for Māori to keep a connection to their place. And for our kaina, it's understanding, well, what would you want in your home? As a New Zealander, what would you want in New Zealand? Now, are there any teachers in the audience? Well, I can say to you right now, all of you are teachers. All of you are teachers. Are there any students in the audience? I can say to you right now that all of you are students, because we never stop learning. And there's a saying that was given to me that was quoted by the late Wharehui Muroi, who was given to Rangi Mātāmua and then shared to me. Ki te haere koe ki waho o te tukupū, me haere koe ki roto. In order for you to travel the outer rim of the universe, we must first understand what is within. We cannot go anywhere else without understanding who we are. So what is our place? What is our place? What do we have in our home? Understanding ko ai koe, who you are in this place at time. And it becomes quite a fundamental concept for general well-being. People who are very successful often think about material wealth and think of philosophy to themselves and think, well, what have I, who am I at a certain point? And a person that is entrenched in knowing who they are often projected in areas that they feel more comfortable in. So I'd just like to share that piece of wisdom, because part of who I am is being displayed here, that is kept in the museum. So I'm going to talk about, keeping with the theme of Matariki, I want to talk about tupuarangi. Mea rangi, we are forest-dwelling tribe. So the bounty on the land ensured our survival within the heart of Te Urewera. And we have unique traditions and customs that are unique to our identity and our heritage. So tupuarangi, I'll be talking just specifically about that particular star constellation. Rupe Whaturua is an entire whakapapa pertaining to the Kōrero. So according to some narratives, tāne, the whakapapa of Kōrero, tāne married hine parauri ka puta ko te Kōrero. In other narratives, Rupe is the personified form of a Kōrero. Rupe is the mātāmua of Maui. Rupe Whaturua, when you just kind of go like that, you get that double chin, that's Whaturua. So literally, the fat is extruding. Rupe Whaturua. So Rupe Whaturua, we're talking about the bounty of the Kōrero. When we're talking about tāne, we're talking about the forest productivity, the abundance that it gives us. And we call upon the abundance of our forest to strengthen us and our tribe. Speaking of this particular time, this whakatauki is often heard. Ka ki te ao Matariki, kua mau ka te hinu. This particular time of the year, Matariki appears. This is the time when all huahua kereru, now a huahua is a, so this is a taha kereru, or it could be a kereru, it could be a kōkō, it could be a kiore, or it could be a pihipihi. And it's often depicted here with the feathers. It'll indicate what species of kereru is stored in this particular hui. So this time of the year, kua mau ka te hinu, the kereru is preserved and the fat is set. Right? So there's a special ceremony that happens around this time of the year that atones the kereru to the taha. So there's the kereru being caught there in the rupe. Rupe is another word for the tari, or the noose that is around the neck of a kereru. So rupe is another word for tari or noose. I'm just going to go back to my own story. When I People ask me, how did I become interested in science? And is there anyone out there that wants to be a scientist? You know, I'm sure everyone has a specific knowledge to share. But I, at quite a young age, we interacted with our forest almost every day. And one day, I went out with 5 ecologists, and they called themselves bird experts, and there was a number of pest experts in the midst in this particular research. And I could hear Kōrero flying in the distance. And just based on the wing beat of the Kōrero, I could tell where that bird was going, how fat that bird was, and what it was eating, just based on the wing beat of that Kōrero. And then I asked the scientists, do you know what that particular bird is doing? And they said, no. And I said, but you're a bird expert. You should, for us, this was common knowledge. And so that opened a door for me to think about the own knowledge that I had. And I thought, well, I have this piece of knowledge, and it's entrenched in my interactions with the species that my culture informed me. And so just based on that, the wing beat of that Kōrero, we know exactly what those birds are doing of that time of the season, how fat they are, and what they are eating at that time of the year. What's happening in our environments with climate change and other impacts upon our environment is that the entire forest fruiting cycles have changed. This is a typical fruiting cycle for my tribe. Kōrero, often we take our indicators from certain tree fruiting seasons, and often with the ripening of tawa, which is the tawa fruit. Do we have tawa here? Sorry. Oh yes, this is a tawa just over here. Sorry, the cameraman. So there's tawaroa in the east coast and parts of the east coast. But when fruits of the tawa is made available, Kōrero gorge themselves on that particular fruit. But they don't get fat. The fat of the Kōrero on that particular fruit is white. They then move on to kahikatea fruit. Kahikatea is usually ripe around January, February. And there's a saying within Māoridom, kua kahaki hia e te kahikatea. A pigeon has been taken to the kahikatea tree. And it's a symbol because the kahikatea is the tallest tree in the forest, and the woman's the bird is the Kōrero is a personified form of a woman, and so therefore she has taken off with a much bigger person. But that is the saying, and that type of saying sticks to your head, and you know the kahikatea fruit is made available. Following the kahikatea fruit, there is the horopito, and horopito in our area can grow yay high, but sometimes in some areas they can grow quite into large trees. From horopito, they then eat toromiro. Now, toromiro, for those other tribes, they might call it a miro tree. We call it, Tūhoi calls it a toromiro, and it's based on this relationship between the Kōrero and the miro tree. The word toro means to stretch. So the bird is stretching its neck to swallow whole seeds. And what happens for Kōrero, the neck piece we call a tenga, and they would start to gorge themselves without swallowing. And the tenga becomes swollen, and then the bird flies to its rākau whakakeke. We call it a roosting tree for a bird, where it retrieves itself and then begins to digest those seeds from its neck. From eating toromiro, they become whaturua and become very fat. and the fat colour on that bird becomes yellow. Traditionally, our ancestors harvested with some of the instruments that we have here, with tau, with pewa, tutu, but often when they became whatirua in a tauhora, a hunter would be able just to shake the tree and birds would land on the ground. They were so fat. And at that stage, because they begin to extrude themselves with fat, you can see the fat, the yellow just pouring out from the white parts of the feathers of its chest. When they hit the ground, they pop like popcorn. And our traditions dictate to us that any bird that is harvested, all feathers must be collected. Otherwise, that bird will never return to that particular region or to that particular place. And so we, with this long-term knowledge, we put in place a system of sustainability. Speaking of sustainability, I just saw what I was about to talk about. So, in the time of harvesting Kōrero during the toromiro season, my ancestors would send word out to people to identify where the flocks of Kōrero. Now, when I talk about flocks, I'm talking about hundreds of birds in a flock, where my elders had described when they were young men and young women that it darkened the sky as they were witnessed these flocks coming through the canopy. And when they landed on the canopy, they looked like snow in the forest, such the size of the birds in their flock. And in fact, one elder said to me that when he was a young boy, he thought he had heard a Iroquois coming through the forest when a particular flock had come through. Now we have different names for different birds. When a Kōrero is flocking, we call that particular flock a pōkai taramanu. For other birds we have, for instance, a kōkō, we call a tui a kōkō, is a whiri, a tā kōkako. So we have these different names in Māori for different bird flock sizes, and in fact, the fatness of a bird can tell us can indicate to us what type of year that might be for our people. So I'm just going to play something that me and Rangi were part of. In 2019, we gathered together as a marua, as a community, to collect the knowledge about our Kōrero. And we then composed this waiata.
Te Māori o te Kōrero, tikina ki hea, ia Matariki he, te whetū tapu o te tahu he tohu tau kai hau kai he te rā ko nā whata ki te tūa pai nau mai te mangata wai o re hua ariki he papa te whatitiri hoki mai te manu ora ki te maunga ko ia e ko te puanu ia tāne hei haukahi ko te oha ka haere whenua. Ka ua te houhi te kōhai. Ka waporo kai where ahe. Nau mahi e manu ki tā kutua.
Now, before the harvest of Kōrero, our people used to gather to our sacred mountain, and that was just the imagery of where our sacred mountain is, Maunga Pōhatu. And at Maunga Pōhatu, an elaborate ceremony was conducted for the official opening of the harvesting of Kōrero. You see, Kōrero wasn't harvested any time of the year. It was only in a short period, and it would end around this time of the year when the hinu, kua maoka te hinu. So a ceremony would happen, the tohuna would go up to the caves, they would conduct their ahitapu, and their prayers would go up, and they would wait until thunder resounded. In fact, the name of the cave was called Te Ana Whakatani Whatitiri, the thundering cave. And once the sound was heard, then Te Puanui a Tāne was opened, and Kōrero was then harvested by all the families. I'm just going to talk briefly about some of the particularly about the Kōrero. So I spoke briefly about sustainability. In our research, we've found that 30% of juvenile birds never make it to full adulthood. So think of that, 30% of juvenile birds of the entire population would never make it to adulthood. At a really good season, he tauhora, an abundant year, the indicators have told us that the fruit is consistent this year as an abundant season. You can get 3 chicks from one bird, 3 chicks. So 30% of birds die an accidental death. Our ancestors targeted juveniles in all cultures, and in fact, all of us today, we would rather eat lamb. We won't eat, you'll see a label of something that's younger. And it, similarly with Kōrero, we targeted juveniles. Now the question is, how can you tell an adult bird from a juvenile just looking at that? Can anyone answer that for me? How can you tell that that's not a juvenile bird or not? Now what my ancestors did is that they would, at their snares, they would grab toromiro, rub it all over their body, and sit in the tree with their spears. Then they would balk at the Kōrero, and any Kōrero that flew off was an adult bird, because the bird had learnt over the years that that wasn't good for itself. But juvenile birds have not yet learnt that lesson, and so my ancestors would harvest from those birds that stayed in the tree. And so we're harvesting from a population that is already in a decline. And so we're not taking from the entire population that would help fulfill those flocks. In fact, we're giving more life to that population because we are taking from that flock. Like deer, if you have too abundant of venison on your land, they become skinny, just like Kōrero. For us, you had to take Kōrero from the flock in order for it to be healthy. So this is a waka Kōrero. I'm just going to walk around here. This is modern day technology for catching Kōrero. In my area, there was a pai, like this, but there was also a tāhuhu that held the rupe, the nooses, above where they are now. And often these waka kereru were left in the forest, and they were often trees claimed by particular whānau. So these waka kereru that were placed at those groves, they were symbols of someone's mana in the area. So often you would never go into other people's orchards, as they would say, to harvest from other people's backyards. So waka kereru, kereru would come to eat toromiro. They become very thirsty, and then they take to these waka kereru that are filled with water. And when they put their necks into the noose, they take off, and then they strangle themselves. And hunters would collect the birds as they check in on their waka kereru. These waka kereru were often made from tōtara. Some have been made from maire, and they're very heavy. Trees depicted, toromiro groves depicted mana of a person, the status of a person. So just imagine you had a great forest and it was so tall. Those tall trees were often given to slaves because the whakatauki is he wera i te ahi, get burnt by fire, he tore mi i te wai, you drown, he taka i te rākau, you fall from a tree. That was common death in our ancestors' times. And so tall trees didn't mean great mana. It actually meant, well, there's a possibility that you could get injured here. And those were given to the lower class of our society. And the great rangatira trees of our forest, which were very short tawa, very short toromiro, were given to the rangatira. Ka pai? Just real practical, made sense. You would respect your elders or your chiefs in that manner. So kereru were harvested in their hundreds, according to my elders. And they were highly protected. Every action according to harvesting birds and preserving birds and provisioning birds were highly guided by a tohunga. Every aspect of the kereru had a name. From a pipi, just imagine if this was a pipi, this is a pipi suti shearwater, I think, a titi. We would call that, at that stage, a hauturuki. So a hauturuki to a pūhau is the next stage. That's the juvenile stage of a kereru. Now, a pūhau had fine feathers. And in our traditions, we often reflect, in our religion or our culture, we often reflect our environments and our wildlife. Turuki was given to the name Te Kōti because he brought a new faith into our community. And so therefore was given the name Turuki because of that new growth on these new birds. Kia ora kaifore. And so that great, you see the mana transfer onto another mana of a person. I know Tame spoke about the talking kōkō. In my sub-tribe, we had a tohuna, which was a talking kōkō. And often if the tohuna wasn't available, the kōkō would recite the appropriate karakia pertaining to each stage of the process. And that kōkō, word for word, would incite the incantations. And in fact, so our kōkō was called tauaiti in our particular area. And tauaiti would, because it was predominantly a male activity for harvesting birds, there were at times where women harvested birds alongside our men. and the kōkō would go around to the woman, and the kōkō would say that that woman was allowed to go and harvest. Because if a lady is going through her cycle, it is deemed tapu in the environment. Blood spread in the forest is considered a tapu. And so the kōkō would detect from every person who is allowed and who is not allowed to go harvesting in this particular season. And that's how we used our birds with our ancestors. And you would ask yourself, well, how was this? How did they teach the kōkō to do this? Do we have any takers on that? How would you teach a bird to do such an act? Now, what my ancestors cleverly did was that they would take juvenile kōkō from streams closer to rivers that all they could hear was river noise. And when they were taken as chicks, they would then be taught how to do a karakia or conduct a karakia. And so they went from listening to the roar of a river to then being recited. So because they haven't interacted with their parent birds, and so they do not know what the sound of their parent bird, and so therefore you become the parent of that bird and you start teaching your kōkō. And that's how my ancestors used the kōkō as a tohuna, but also to identify who in the hunting party would be allowed to go. Now, when kereru were harvested, the entire community was involved. There were hunters and there were pluckers. Women often sorted which feathers were used for which occasion. And there were even elderly who would suck the moisture out from the birds to be preserved. That process we call a mākiri. We deboned my ancestors deboned the birds without breaking the entire bird. And so it was because it's a sacred manu, only the joints of the wing of the kereru was broken. Now, if you have a look at some moko aras, on their face, a full face moko, you might see a break in these lines here. That is a symbol of their commitment to tāne. That is the connection between your commitment, because your face is tāne. You are an offspring of tāne. And so therefore you have committed one of the children of tāne onto your face. And the breaking of the wings that is depicted in the kape and the tīwhana is your dedication to that practice. And so there's mana transferred into our ceremonies and into our arts like moko. Now, when kereru were harvested, they were stored in hue, and they became tapu. The outer rim of the hue, or the taha, the huahua, is called a ihihi. And my ancestors invented hearing aids. Yes, you heard right. The bones of the kereru are soft. In fact, when you're consuming kereru, all that's left is the beak and the claws. And in fact, the beak and the claws is used by women for lipstick. But part of the bone, there's a narrow bone in the just inside here. They used to take that, dry it, clean it, and place it for any deaf person in their eardrum as a hearing device. The feathers were also used for medicine, and if you were bored, they would use the turuki to grow hair. And so our ancestors knew everything about kereru because we were so entrenched. Our life, our culture, our existence dependent on the availability of that bird. I just want to turn our attention to this korowai. Now, I didn't know what was on display and available to us, and I asked the people at the back, and they kindly said, oh, we'll go to the back and have a look just a few minutes before we began. And I said, well, there's a particular korowai that I know of that is a full Kōrero that is outlined by kākā feathers. And it was once owned by a man called Pinohi, who was a son of two takanahau who informed Elston best. And two takanahau, in his wisdom at that time, thought it would be wise to give up one of his, it was Pinohi who gave up one of his children to be educated by Elston best. And that child unfortunately passed away. And in Elston, in their grief, Pinohi dedicated this, or gifted this particular korowai to Elston best, just because of the amount of burden that was, because that child was in Elston best's care. And so, I'm real privileged to see this, to touch this, to smell this, and think about the heritage that it has for me and my mea rangi and our people. I think that's enough for Kōrero. Reflections. Sorry. Bicultural approaches to conservation. Environmental monitoring is really dependent on the quality of information that you receive, right? And so often we are in this world disconnected from our environments and very much dependent on other forms of information to inform decision making. And so therefore I think that returning to practice, returning to any form of engagement with our environments needs to be enabled, and that what Rangi has developed in terms of relationships between people and the importance with the environment has put a spotlight on what it matters to us. So Māori worldview representation is important to how we relate to biodiversity. How have you, this is the question that I want to leave for you today, is how have you connected to the environment? How have you contributed to the well-being of our environment? And how have you, given the knowledge that we've received today, how have you enabled the connection of Māori to their own environments? So biological and cultural diversity is vital to conservation and environmental management. And the metaphors that we hear within different expressions and the way that the stars are personified gives a much richer narrative towards conservation initiatives and a more holistic look at our well-being. Policy and legislation needs to include Māori worldviews within how it approaches conservation. And we have much been devoid in the last 50 years of that today. Nō reira e hoa mā koe nei waku kōrero whakaoti atu ki a koutou. Tēnā koutou, kia ora tātou katoa.
Tēnā koe puki ngā kōrero rangatira nei. Thank you very much. I'm gonna get everyone come up and our three speakers and have a little bit of answer and question time if you've got any questions. I'm just gonna call our cameraman over for a minute. So I want to show you some of the things that are on display here, and I want to talk to you exactly. Made a comment before. I said everything that's on display here except perhaps for the European Norwegian rat and the waxeye, because they haven't been here that long, are actually stars in the sky. And I'm just going to show, maybe I can turn this mic on. Oh yeah, there we go. So I want to show you some, hopefully it comes up, but we've got a few insects on display. So I just wanted to show you this small green one here at the top there. That is a Manuka green beetle. That is a kekerewai. Now there is an association between that, and you stay there on the camera there. I'm just going to grab one of these birds. There's association between that insect. I don't know if I'm meant to carry these around, but I'm going to. And this bird here. So this creature and that creature are said to be ngā pōtiki a rehua, or ngā manu a rehua. So these are birds of rehua. So here you have the kōkō and the Manuka green beetle. Now they're most active in summer. So rehua hits the eastern horizon just before the sun rises in summer, so you know what season you're in the summertime. Now, my people believe that when Tāne went looking for knowledge, he climbed into the heavens and he came to our rangatira rehua, who is personified in the star Antares. Another name for rehua is rupe, and Puke was talking about rupe, how it's attached to the pigeon. I'll come to that in a minute. But he had these kutu in his hair, and it probably relates to tame, not because tame's got kutu or head lice, but because he's talking about pest management. This was one of the first managers of pests, is this bird here. But in that time it was completely black. It had no marking or no feather under its throat. And it was eating the kutu or the head lice in rehua's hair. And so when Tāne gained knowledge and he was coming back to earth, Rehua said, I've got a couple of gifts to take with you. These are some of my birds, and this was one of them. He took it off his head. He plucked the star out of the sky so we'd never forget it has celestial origins, and stuck it on its throat. Now that's the reason why it can speak like anyone. Is unlike the other birds, it doesn't come from the forest. It actually, its voice comes from the stars, and hence it can mimic any sound just like the stars. There are multitudes of stars. It can mimic any sound, and that's the origin of this little tuft under its throat. It's a star. It's most active in the summer. It puffs itself out and chases other birds away. Another very active creature in the summer is back to this beetle, te kekerewai, or the green Manuka beetle, and you'll see them around Manuka, and they'll fly around quite a lot, active in summer. So there's a correlation between that. Another relation is the kihikihi, or the cicada, the piharenga, the cricket, the mawhitiwhiti, the grasshopper. All of these are the birds of rehua active in the summertime. You'll hear them, you'll see them. That's a relationship. So we know we engage with those species whenever that star rises. We know what should be in the environment. Just below here, there's another group of beetles. These are our chafer beetles. Tanguru are their names. Tame asked me, oh, what's February? February is hui tanguru. Tanguru is when the chafer beetle drills itself into the ground, becomes a whakatātaka it's called. They become a beetle in the ground. And then in the month of February, March, in that lunar phase, they used to appear from the ground and swarm in massive multitudes. Hui, to come together and swarm, tanguru. The tanguru swarming during that month. So the whole month gets its name off the activity of that beetle, which is also aligned with the hui tanguru star, which rises in the morning, that appears in the morning in the sky, telling us that that beetle's about to come out of the earth. Thank you. Oh, if we go to the side here, we've got some really cool creatures. This one here, this is a hawk moth. This is the moth that's related to Here we go. This beetle caterpillar here, it's a hawk moth caterpillar, a moka or a torongu. Another star comes out in March. These are the things that you'll find on your kumara gardens. They are like a caterpillar, but it's got horns on its head. So that's an actual star that will appear in the month of February again, March. So you know, you gather it, otherwise it's going to eat through your kumara. We have some other nutara, vegetable moth, that's its cocoon there. Nutara is what our ancestors would take and mash into ash. It's an actual natural antiseptic. So when they would do the tattoo, and Puke talked about getting the tattoo on your face, they would mash it with the ash and actually put it into the carved face so it wouldn't get infected. So a nutara has got a natural antiseptic. Again, another star, so you know when it's ready to be harvested. And here's another one, te pūtori no araukatauri, or a case moth. Another group of stars. This is the female inside the cocoon. When the larvae breaks out and flies off, becomes a moth and flies off, it leaves the female still inside. She dies in there. What happens is the wind is said to blow along and hit the lip and make a little bit of a sound. That's the origins of the flute, the pūtorino, or the Māori flute. So when the wind would go, it would go, probably a lot better than that. And that's the origin. And again, another insect that has an astronomical origin, so we know when to interact with that species. I just want to bring up on the screen, if I can, the first image that I have on my slide. It's the only one I'm going to show, really, is there it is. That's how the sky was this morning. Now you're going to see 3 stars in that of, again, I'm not too sure if I'm meant to be picking this up, but there you'll see Orion's belt. You can see Orion's belt, and you follow Orion's belt to the left, and you're going to see a kind of a pyramid-shaped star, group of stars. Can you see that? It's like a diamond, like a triangle. Can you see the triangle? You see my fat head? And just to the right and above my fat head, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stars that make up a little bit of a diamond. That is depicted in this implement here. This is a kāheru. So the diamond shape is actually the blade, and on the behind me you can see the diamond shape and then a few stars that lead away, creating the handle of this here. Now this is how it rose this morning, exactly in that position. Now your implements on your garden, like these implements, aren't in use during this time because, you know, Māori didn't have a winter crop. There was no rhubarb, all right? No, whatever else you grow in winter. No, what was I going to call it? What do we? How te kōrero? How te name here? Turnip top. No turnip. But what happens is as the stars get higher and higher in the next couple of months, when the sun's rising, that's going to start to turn over like that. That is a symbol to us as we get into our spring, it's time to turn your garden over with your kāheru and start to till your soil to be preparing for your planting. Hence the name of that cluster is Matariki, the space of the diamond head spade. So as it turns over, you actually turn your garden over and begin to plant. And on the top there, you have a whakaore. See the whakaore right on the top? That is a crescent moon. That's showing the last quarter of Tangaroa, telling you the correct lunar phase to turn your garden over and to plant your garden. So in that implement, in that cluster of stars, you have all of this notion of when and how to interact with your environment. You see the 3 stars there in Tautoru. This here is a pewa. I'll bring it round. You see the 3 stars in tautoru. Here they are. That's the 3 stars. That's the perch. And then you see the handle going the other way. There it is there. That's the 3. That's the handle. That's the perch. This is a pewa. Puke talked about the birding. What you would do is you'd create this rope here. That's a loop. There's a hole right here. This is called te hao orua. The middle star in the handle of the pot is called te hao orua. The bird comes along right during this season. Here we go. During this season, as those 3 stars are there, the bird comes along and it will hold on to this perch and get its feet caught into the noose. You pull this rope, because you wouldn't be this close, you'd be quite far away. Pull a rope, the bird's feet get snared in the hao orua, and you dispatch the bird, and so you take it and eat it. And as Puke was saying, this is a time when the birds are fat and they're ready to be harvested. There's another simple application of when that is in that position, this implement is applied, so you know what activity you should be undertaking depending upon what stars are in the sky. And there's a couple, 2 more, because I could go on all day. But there's a couple of things I really want to show you, and they're over here. I know that there's a star. It's connected to Matariki right at this time. It's one of these, it's a little bit further off down the bottom here. You can just see the top of it. I don't want to show you. I can't, my hand's not that long. I'm not tall like Tame. But it's this creature here. It's a piharau. A piharau, cool. I'm going to turn around. Can you see that mouth? Oh, what a beautiful creature this is. And I want to thank our staff here at Te Papa for your amazing work and the way that all of you have helped to bring these taonga out. Because this is the real richness in what you do and what we do. And that's that intersection between knowledge systems. Because there is a group of stars, and actually the bottom bit of the star is circular like the mouth of this creature here. It's a lamprey. It's a piharau, a kangakanga, a korokoro. Now they actually, the young of these actually are born and spend the first end of their lives in the rivers, and they get a bit bigger, and they go out to the ocean, and then they find a big fish, and using that mouth that they've got, they'll latch themselves onto the side of something like a whale or a big fish, and then they'll pretty much, I guess, for want of a better way to say it, suck the blood out of it like a vampire and get bigger and bigger. Matariki rises, hits the horizon right at this time. These things detach from the fish when they're adults, and they'll come up the rivers and they'll spawn. And they were harvested in massive numbers, and they spawn and then they die, and then the next generation follow that cycle. This is a piharau. They were very, very common, but because we have done a lot of degradation to their environment, they are at risk, and they're found in fewer places now, and those massive migrations that used to occur no longer happen in the same numbers. And this is another one that's in trouble, and you would have seen that picture that Puke put up about the eels. Here is a indication. This is a long fin, only a small one. This is nowhere else in the world you get this species of eel. Such a hardy creature. And some of these things, and you would have seen some of them hanging up as we harvested them. We didn't catch them to eat them, we caught them to age them only. And then we thought we shouldn't waste them, so we better eat them. But you take a bone out of the ear to age them, and some of those eels can be up to 100 years old before they actually migrate out. There is a constellation of stars. Francine was talking about waiting for certain weather indicators. You also wait for certain stars, and Tunanui rises towards the end of summer, when it's fully exposed, the entire eel, you know that at the next rains and the thunder that the eels will run, and you go and wait for them to move. And they used to move in massive, massive numbers. I have real fears for these creatures because they'll end up like this one here. I just want to show that one if I can. I've never seen one of these alive. I'd be very surprised if any of you have, because this is a grayling. Māori know that as a upokōrero. A upokōrero is actually a constellation of stars in the sky. It rises just after the summer. There's a commonplace right across the country of this fish in massive, massive numbers. And I know that in 1919, Alison Best travelled with Sir Peter Buck up to the Waiapu River, and they set some nets and they caught some of them. And it was the last known harvest, actually Māori harvest of this species. I think it must have been, I'm pretty sure it's about the 30s, the last record of it. In the 1930s, the last seen grayling, and now it's completely gone, no longer exists. This was a staple fish, freshwater, because it came up into freshwater diet of our people, and it's completely gone. And all the knowledge with it is gone, and the practice of it is gone because we didn't look after its environment. And every year I feel really, really sad when I watch that group of stars rise, because it's rising, telling us we need to interact with that part of our environment, and that part of the environment is gone. And exactly what Puke was saying, for our tribe, the entire cycle of our tribal species, our tribal people, sometimes we are a species, I'll be honest. The entire cycle and understanding of who we are as a people was built on our interaction with that species. And that species is in major, major decline. And so I think one of the important elements of these type of indications and these types of presentations is to talk about what's happening in the environment and to say all of these taonga, while they might have been around harvest, they're about interaction and actually connecting to the environment, actually being part of the environment. Before I invite the other three up, because I know some of you have got some questions, I must say thank you for pulling this out, but it's a very poorly looking huia, I must say. There's not much tail feathers left on this bird. I think Watene Campbell has plucked those off and has sold them on eBay or something. I'll be looking into that, Courtney. The huia for Māori comes from the heavens. It is a sacred bird. It has a celestial origins. It was sent to us because it has a marker of time attached to this bird and its tail feathers. And Tami was saying I might want to share this with you, and I will. There are 12 tail feathers on a huia usually. I think this one has about 5. They are made with, they come with 12 tail feathers. Each of those tail feathers represents a month, a lunar month of the Māori year. So when they were taken out and spread across like that on the ground, they would indicate your 12 months of the Māori year. At the top is the white part that's actually representative of the full moon. So as you start from the new moon, right down, I don't want to pull the feather off. It's dark, goes all the way up to the top, it becomes full, and all the way back down to the bottom, and then you end that month and you put it to the side, and then the next feather month starts. It goes up and down, and that's its connection to the year. Every now and again you would find, I suppose it would be a genetic throwback. It's probably not the right word, but it's a genetic, something wrong with the genetics in the bird, and they'll end up with 13 feathers in its tail. Quite often it would be white, the long bit with a black bit on the top. Now that is an indication of a bird that was indicating 13 months. in a year, and a Māori calendar system actually has a 13th month inside the calendar system every 3 years, because a lunar year is shorter than a solar year, and over 3 years you have to add in an extra month, and that is indicated with the knowledge that's pertained in the tail of this bird. These are just some of the sprinklings of mātauranga Māori that are attached to some of these creatures that you see on the table. For some of Puke's relations, this one here is still a delicacy. The kiore. Really wanted to ask, because I shouldn't have taken that time, those, Francine, Puke and Tame, if you want to come back up, and just to ask anyone if you have any questions for any of the panelists, please feel free to ask. Thank you. And if you don't, we can finish early. Oh, thank you. Do you want a chair? You can sit over there in the front if you want to.
Just sit on the stage.
You can sit on the stage. You can jump off it too.
Oh, bro.
I mean, like Kaiwhare was doing.
I'll stand here with Kaiwhare.
Does anyone have any questions?
Hara mai, son.
Patai mai e koro.
Hara mai, pēnā.
Look, kia ora koutou. Kia ora koutou na kuranga tira. E hu mai nei, I nei te atamira. He pātai. Ko ngā kiore nei. Kai kiore. Kai te mōhio kōrua. Te kiore pano nei. Te he kiore pano no te nahere. No rua tāhuna te ua kiore. Kai te ora tonu, kai te aha ua kiore pano. I'm talking about the black rat deep in the forest of Ruatahuna. I'm just questioning ngā rangatira nei. Does that black rat still exist? He kiore panu. Kia ora.
You better answer that question.
Yeah, that's a good question. Whether or not the kiore Māori is still in existence. Now, there's populations down in Fieldland. We've got a team of rat experts that are studying rats down there. Well, our elders did say they ate rats, and in particular kiore, and I'm sure in Te Urewera there would be, but they are consumed by this particular rat, the Norwegian rat. Where there is presence of this, there's usually no kiore. But I know of researchers that have found kiore up in high ranges in the fields. But e aua, karau te mōhio, I'm not too sure.
Yeah, in my time of trapping there and us, we've never found any of them, just the introduced rat. So yeah, I couldn't say conclusively that they're not there, but I don't think so. Not where we trap anyway.
I think they're just trying to hide them from us, that they do have them and they're nice to eat.
No, we go chicken McNuggets these days. Pate anō, any other questions?
Tame, really loved your talk. I've been waging war against rats on my back property now for several years, and this whole thing of them sort of targeting chosen species. With the sort of ability now with microelectronics, do you think that we could have a little chip that gives out the cicada call to try and encourage more rats into a trap?
Yeah, so I mean, sound lures and scents as well. definitely a big space in terms of research, and I think Manaki Whenua and a lot of the research entities that play in this space are looking into it. But I do know, I mean, I forgot what I was meant to finish my kōrero with is, there's that quote, if you want a new story, look to an old book. And I think if you want new innovation, look to old knowledge. And so, yeah, the ability to use sort of the concepts like karakia or sound and use modern technology like a device that would play it sounds like a no-brainer. There is some entities like Cacophony who are combining AI with modern tools like trapping. Basically, an animal walks into a device and they can determine is that a target animal or not, especially for backyards where there's cats and stuff, and then deliver whatever the control method is. But then going one step further is, yeah, what are the sounds or scents that they could use to then attract the right ones as well? I think, yeah, watch this space for the next 50 years. In the meantime, yeah, you're just going to have to put up with, you're going to have to learn how to make some ruru sounds.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Thank you very much. My name's Paul. I come from the north of Ireland. I grew up with the scientific tradition, but also a deep, what was given to me by my parents. They came from Northern Europe. So I have an appreciation for an earth-based understanding, as well as coming from a scientific education. And I'm really intrigued always to hear Indigenous knowledge and trying to understand it. And I'm enjoying and understanding further your perspective. So there's been some debate recently about Mataranga Māori and the new curriculum in the New Zealand education system. What can you, how can you explain the relation between the incredible knowledge that you're transmitting and have acquired with the knowledge of correlation? All science is just about correlation. No difference to what you're talking about. For example, I'm trying to understand this spot on, it's not a tui. What was the bird with the white spot?
Yeah, a tui.
Yep. Tui. What did you call it?
Kōkō.
Thank you. How can we understand how that spot was acquired in a way that more people can understand that? I'm not sure how to ask the question. So people coming from the Western perspective say, well, what are you talking about? That's nonsense. We know evolution. Well, we don't know evolution's often just nonsense as well. Lots of stories that are unsubstantiated. But tell me more about that white spot.
Thank you, and thank you for that question, because there has been some discourse around mātauranga Māori and science as if that they are adversaries. They're not adversaries. Mātauranga Māori is underpinned by empirical science and based on the same ideals that all knowledge bases have: inquiry, application, review, reapplication. So it's about answering questions. And one of the, getting me wrong, is also as someone that loves the idea of, even the idea of what Western science is. Perhaps mainstream science is a way to explain that. Things like quantum mechanics, quantum physics, astrophysics. I love studying that as well. But for me, I think one of the wonderful things about Indigenous knowledge systems, because they are underpinned by seeking answers to questions. But what they drive us to do is interact and practice with the environment. And I think that's one of the differences. And in order to force that interaction or encourage that interaction, they are wrapped around with cultural narratives and cultural beliefs, even, dare I say, to the point of being spiritual in its nature. That doesn't take away from the fact that they're empirical science. It doesn't take away from the fact that we know that bird's most active in summer, and that we know that it'll be eating the tops of the flax, and so it'll be very, very sweet, and we know that that's the time that you harvest it. But in order to make that appealing, what all native cultures did, and indigenous cultures, and even the Celts, they wrapped that knowledge into this cultural narrative that helped us to interact with that space. I think one of the downfalls of our modern Western all-knowing perhaps science is we know to know, but we definitely don't know to practice. So there's irrefutable evidence to say we're heating up the globe. We all know that. Still, we don't change our practices. Whereas when our culture wraps a narrative around a scientific understanding and principle, like the taking of that star and putting on the throat, so we know that that bird will be active when that star's in the sky, which is in its actual correlation from a scientific point of view, it helps us to interact. And so we don't know just to know, but we know to practice. And for me, I think that's kind of what underpins that kind of argument, because you don't sail the expanse of the Pacific Ocean on myths and legends. You do it on empirical science. But to remember that and for it to have purpose, you wrap it in a cultural narrative that people will think, that's not proper science. Maybe not from your perspective. But for us, we navigated that expansive ocean and came here and created a narrative that connected to our culture. And I hope that kind of answers that question.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that sometimes you can get a complex result. Now, to articulate that complex result to an audience is going to be a challenge. And often Māori would take that complexity and turn it into a narrative, and for children to understand. And for instance, in my region, tawa, the tawa tree and fern tree are becoming quite prominent in our forest, and therefore our protocarps are getting suppressed by these two particular tree species. And that's a common phenomenon that's happening at the moment. And so then changes the condition of the forest and the birds that depend on the fruits of that forest. And so we coined a whakatauki. E kore te rangatira e tipu I raro I te maru o te tawa. A chiefly person will not grow under the shadow of a tawa tree. And so in our practice, traditionally we went around cutting tawa groves in order to protect our middle trees because of the link between those that bird and our orchards. And so in a complex situation, we implemented kaitiakitanga, or our stewardship, through this one whakatauki that our children understood. But also it had implications on if you suppress society that want to grow leaders. You know, it goes beyond just ecological function. It's telling us a story about ourselves as a society.
Pate anō.
Kia ora koutou. Ko te pora mōre te taku ingoa. Kia ora ngā rangatia. A o ngā rangatia. Kia ora o ngā whānau katoa. O te ao marama. O ngā whetū. To the gardener. Kia ora. Ko whaia. He rāua. He māua. Ai, koena? Well, I was a gardener from a young age. My dad, from my ancestors, they used to have plantations all up the east coast, up at Ruatoria. And my aunties and my papa would go out and plant seeds, kai. And ai moko. Yeah. And they used to plant. Every day they'll get up early, 5 o'clock in the morning and plant, you know. Well, my dad brought that down to Wellington. And he always had a garden, which taught us kids, to plant a garden, you know. Now, I karakia over my garden all the time. I've got a garden right now, you know. But my dad used to plant Māori potatoes, him and my uncle, and used to bring the trailer down to Wellington to the flats in Pomare, and used to leave the trailer there for all the people to come and get whatever you wanted of Māori potatoes, you know. And when my karawa, his dad and his mum and all my aunties, that's how they did it. They fed the iwi, you know. And I'm born from a ringawera, you know. I'm a planter too, dear. Yeah. So kia ora ki a koe.
Kia ora. Tēnā koe I tō pātai. Pātai anō. Kia ora.
Kia ora ki.
Kia ora.
Oh, kia ora. Hei, ngā mahi a kia kawitau kātou mō tō kōrero. Rau e rawa atu ki a hau. My question for Tame is, well, actually, do you know what? I think relative to this whole thing, it's all been about kai. And if there's anything that any culture knows, is kai, which brings us all together as a people, you know, regardless of what culture you're from. Tame, kia ora Tame, and I was just listening to you relative to the bird species and the kai that they eat from the rākau. And I guess the man down the front that talked about how I would get rid of kiore, is it as simple as planting trees that the ruru love to eat from, and then putting tui in the trees that the tui love so they can actually mimic the ruru, which will bring, you know, that ecological cycle back, you know, to getting rid of those kiore that love those and then trapping them in those whatever traps we want to. Like, is it really that simple, to be honest, just planting our trees, introducing the tui where they no longer are in full force to mimic a ruru, then the ruru will follow those voices and breed with the ruru that are there, you know, the normal cycle. What do you think, Tame?
You just took 5 years of my work and simplified it. So thank you. No, you're so right, though. I mean, that's what it's about. When it comes to pest control, the simple answer is there's a pest, let's attack it, you know, let's trap it. But the way we should really be thinking about it is the ecosystem's in need of improvement in health. I mean, what can we do to better that? And planting kills two birds with one stone, and excuse the pun, but planting trees to attract the right species, in one sense, but also there's some plant species like tutu that are actually toxic to rats. So juvenile rats will have a crack at the berries and then tip over. And there was some research. Were you involved in that research with the tutu berry? It's toxic. Sean Ogilvie. There was some research to look at tutu as weaponising the toxin in the berries to use against rats. So you're so right. You know, we can use plants not only to attract the right birds, but also as a deterrent or a pesticide. There was some cool kōrero I found and heard from back in the day when feral kuri populations will get out of control. Around the pā, they'd take karaka berries, dip them in bird fat and scatter them around the bush, and the dogs would eat them and then tip over. As we all know, karaka berries are toxic to dogs. The irony in that is that you're taking a plant-derived toxin, putting it in a bait and scattering it in the forest to kill a predator. Now, I've just described 1080, but I've used, you know, something our tupuna did. So again, if you want new knowledge, look to old traditional knowledge. But there is one thing we do need to do, though, and that is that it's no good attracting bird species back to an area if they're just going to get hammered. You're basically taking something, and putting it into the fire. So if we are going to bring bird species back like that, we do kind of need the trapping as well, because once the ruru does nest, we're going to need to have the rat populations down to a low enough point where what do you call a baby ruru? An owlet. Basically, the baby ruru has a chance to survive. Good pātai. Again, way to make my 5 years of thing in one kōrero.
Baby ruru's a woo-woo. Pātai whakamutunga, please, last question.
Wa hoki māno ki āhau. Conservation is Doc, kia ora koe. Question for you. Tawa, the tawa we talked about, everybody talked about the tawa. Is it a tree that is poisonous? You talked about 1080. Isn't that a poisonous tree in native? If so, I can explain it. The tawa trees, the tawa berries, because I believe that wherever there's tawa, it's tawa alone, no other trees are not allowed around it. Is that true?
Tawa do grow predominantly, and they're faster growing than a lot of our natives, and they weren't as good as, they weren't used as much as some of the other rako, so hence why you'll probably find tawa more in our forests than other ones. Tōtararemu, kaikatea, they were taken predominantly for their use and left tawa. But also, you're right in a sense that a lot of tawa berries are quite, is it alkaline or acidic? One of those. The berries are quite one side of the other, and in turn perpetuate further tawa growth through making the soil more susceptible to tawa berry growth. But that's not to say that, and we can eat tawa berries as well, they're not toxic to us, they just sort of promote tawa growth, they further promote it. Pines are probably the worst ones though. Pine needles make the ground really acidic, and the thing that grows best in acidic soil is more pines. So tawa does it to a certain extent. However, if we didn't have deer, possums, wallabies in the Bay of Plenty, we would get some of those other seeds that are able to grow in soil that's been interrupted by tawa, and then further grow. But yeah, it's a combination of factors that lead to a predominantly tawa forest.
Kia ora, and I'm going to call us to an end there, sorry. Thank you so much, but we're just a little bit over time, and me and Puke got to go jump on the plane. So please, can you show your appreciation for our three presenters today? I also want to give a huge thank you to our Te Papa staff on our behalf for preparing all of the creatures, taonga, rodents, hinaki, fish species that we have on display, and also to our cameramen, our technical people, our sound people, and also hope you really go out into this Matariki holiday season and think about our greater connection to our environment and to our world. Matariki is a marker of not only our new year and where we are in the world, but our connection back to our environment. And hopefully those are things we can take away. Just want to finally say that tēnā koe Francine, the beautiful hue you have grown, there are packets of seeds, if you would like them, that will just shift out to the front. Come and grab you a packet of seeds, go home and plant them where there's no pigs. Nō reira, tēnei te mihi nui ki a koutou ki a tātou, kia ora tātou.
Aku tamariki, tamariki a tāne, ko pūna were were pūrere hua anuhe, ko pare ko mako kahika te kauri. Ko pipi wharauro tīrai raka meruru, e noho nei i tēnā here whakamaua kia tīna.